Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to get started with our May 9th session. I am first going to turn to our clerk, Ms. Lamarcy, for any changes.
She's running.
She's running. Ms. Lamarcy.
Thank you. There's an addendum this morning. Item 5, the budget for the Office of Management and Budget, and item 23, the budget for cost sharing, Montgomery County Government, state matching community grants, arts capital grants for current replacements and modernizations. Both of those items are being deferred until the council meets on Monday, May 13th.
Thank you, Ms. Lamarcy. Our first item is action on appointments to the committee to recommend funding for public elections fund. In our packet, we see here that we have Mr. Davis Skoll as chair, Nancy McCann-Farrar as vice chair, Lee Annis, Sam Statland, and Stephen Whitted as members. That's before us. Is there a motion? It's moved
Second.
by Councilmember Katz and seconded by Councilmember Albornoz. Okay, there are no lights for discussion. All those in favor, please raise your hand. That is unanimous among those present. Thank you very much to those that have volunteered to be members of this committee. It's a very important committee, and we really do appreciate your taking the time to volunteer. So those appointments have been approved. The next item is our budget consent calendar, and what we're doing here is that we are adopting items 2 to 4, 6 to 22, and 24 to 40. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Move Councilmember Reamer. Is there a second? Second by Councilmember Friedson. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. There's so much that we could talk about here. It's a consent calendar, but it's, as in our last session, there's so many different important aspects that have been worked through by the committees. I just wanted to highlight, at least to begin, one particular important priority area, which is after-school programming, and item 30, which is the Recreation Department budget recommendation. And we had a really good committee session to talk about what we're doing with after-school programming, following up on a recent report by our Office of Legislative Oversight, which really thoroughly documented how schools with more low-income children have fewer after-school program opportunities, and we really need to try to address that. One of the areas that has really been affected by that issue is our middle school program, and we used to have quite a number of middle school Rec Extra programs, as Director Albornoz used to administer and came into office at right at the most difficult time you could imagine, and the county reduced the programs in the middle school from, we had about 21 middle school programs, and we had to reduce that to 13. So today we have about 2,000 kids who are benefiting from programs in 13 middle schools, and they're developing leadership skills and having fun and doing different kinds of programs that teachers might support, whether it's math and science or sports. There's such a wide range of opportunities. You've got music, you've got art, athletics, life skills, all kinds of initiatives are supported through Rec Extra. And Rec Extra is a very cost-effective or big bang for the buck program. The per school expense for our elementary school strategy is quite significant, several $100,000 per school. But for Rec Extra, it is much, much less. It's about $23,000 per school. So we can serve quite a number of children or young people in the middle school years, which I don't know about you, but those were probably among the hardest years. Middle school is not an easy time. Middle school is when you're suddenly involved in a social environment that is incredibly powerful, and you need help, and not every kid gets help. Not every kid has a family that knows how to provide support in the context that their kids are in. And so programs like these can really make a big difference. So on the reconciliation list, we have 8 Rec Extra programs intended for middle school. It's very cost effective, and I really just want to urge my colleagues to please make that a priority as we go forward, and let's see if we can at least get back to where we were before the recession, let alone figure out how to get beyond that. But with 8 schools on the rec list, if we fully funded those, we could at least be back to where we were before the recession. Thank you.
Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you, Madam President. I certainly concur with Councilmember Reamer's comments. I would only add that I think as we look through a long-term strategy for out-of-school time initiatives and programs, Rec Extra is a good start because it gets you into the school, establishes a relationship with the students, but long-term, the EBB model, the more holistic, well-rounded model, or comprehensive model is the way we ultimately want to get to. But I totally concur that in light of the fiscal challenges that we have ahead, it makes a lot of sense to initiate the Rec Extra programs with the ultimate goal of full EBB implementation. Madam President, the reason I initially requested to speak was regarding item number 14, which is the 2 additional FTEs to serve within a regional business hub concept, which I'm excited about, but through the packet and reviewing deliberations of our colleagues in the Government and Operations Committee, which I think did an absolutely incredible job, I am concerned that this particular concept is not yet fully completed. And so I request a friendly motion that prior to the expenditure of the funds, that there be a report back from the executive branch on exactly how these 2 positions.
Councilmember Alvarez,
Yes.
just a real quick, we are going to be discussing that in item 45.
Got it.
In depth.
Sorry.
So, if you just
My fault.
wait a little bit. No,
right, I
not
will
at
wait.
all. Not at all. It's, it's.
It was
it's a
good
little
practice.
confusing. It was actually very good. And I was actually kind of like, why not? you
Yeah.
know? But we will be getting to that very, very soon.
Sounds good. Thanks.
No, I've been there and done that. Just to the original comment, I also want to express again, because I've been on record saying that, one of the areas that I find of most interest in terms of how we do our business is for us to be, strategic, leverage resources that we can scale up in order to make a difference, especially with our young people. And one of the reasons that I had resisted in the past supporting Rec Extra programs is because many of the research papers that OLO has published has pointed to the fact that we have a lot of students with a lot of needs, and I worry that sometimes when we engage in these rollouts of particular initiatives that don't have that very robust model, we don't get the outcomes that we so desire, and that's why we still are faced with so many gaps, because even though we have invested, we keep watering down a lot of our programs when it comes to the students that need it most and the areas that need it the most. So that's why I've been so interested in how do we figure out a way to carve funding and leverage private funding like we have done with the Children Opportunity Fund to put together models that are so robust that we know we're going to be able to get our return on investment. I don't disagree that there are certain programs that we should look into in areas where you do need some type of after-school activity, but you don't need all those wraparound services and the academic component and the parental engagement and all of that, which does cost money. But anyway, I just feel strongly that at some point we need to really agree on a strategy and a vision, because if not, we will end up in the same space that we have ended up thus far. So just wanted to make that comment. I've made that comment before publicly, but for my new colleagues, just so that you know usually where I'm coming from. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. And I did misspeak. Originally, there were rec extras in all 38 middle schools, and then that was reduced to 21 and now 13. And I agree, we need a comprehensive strategy, and we need a database, data-backed vision. And I also believe the only way to add programs is to make the decision to add programs. And so let's add programs this year. And I strongly support the EBB recommendations as well. We have 4 EBB schools on the list as well. I wanted to turn to a different issue, though. Thank you. On the Economic Development Fund, item 36, I just wanted to clarify, and I actually, in subsequent conversation about our biotech strategy, I wanted to explore a particular issue. This could be very brief. And we don't need to make this into an impromptu work session. But first of all, and this is the right place for this, right? The Economic Development Fund?
Right, so that is fine. I would just urge my colleagues that if there are specific items on the consent calendar that you feel needs to have further discussion, to let us know so that we can pull those items.
Okay.
Because then we don't have people here from the administration that can respond to questions. So if there are particular issues that require,
Yeah.
in-depth conversation, please
Fair
let
point.
Ms. Limarzi know so that we can have folks here.
Thank you.
Go right ahead.
If colleagues would like to just make it a work session and defer, that is totally fine. What I wanted to highlight was, one, there is a recommendation to fund to match state and federal investments in a biomanufacturing center, and I think that's terrific. I wanted to actually suggest that we keep it, though, in the NDA, so that we can have a biohealth strategy conversation.
Is that part of this afternoon's discussion, Mr. Smith?
I believe it's part of this morning's discussion about the
this
incubator.
morning.
We could
Morning's
move it.
discussion.
Would you like to move it to this afternoon?
Is that item
No,
44?
I believe the item you're talking about is in the incubator NDA, not the Economic Development Fund.
So that's item 44, so we're going to be
Okay,
discussing
so
that
we're
right
going to be in that
afterwards.
this afternoon.
Correct.
Okay.
No, this morning.
So I will hold off on that conversation then. Great,
Later
thank
this
you.
morning, hopefully it won't spill over into the afternoon.
It's confusing.
Councilmember Friedson, it
It's
should not be,
confusing.
but,
Yes.
okay.
So we'll
Thank you for clarifying that and look forward to that discussion. I'm hoping that I don't say something that needs to be clarified. We're on a roll here, gentlemen.
Agenda.
It's a good thing we have the council president to keep us in line here and make sure we know what we're talking about. I really just wanted to make a comment. I had thought about making this a work session, opted not to, but specifically related to Maggie Nightingale Library on item 20 in libraries. This is a library that is now being pushed off. It was supposed to start work in the beginning of the fiscal year. It's now going to be pushed off to the middle of the fiscal year. I am not thrilled about that. I know the community is not thrilled about that. I think that this is not just related to this particular library. It's also related to a community that's been told one thing, and then those promises that have been made of the timing of the high school and the timing of other critical public facilities have been delayed time and time again. And I think that it sends the wrong message. And I think there's a little bit of a concern that we've had as we've looked into this of the Department of General Services and libraries not communicating as well as I believe they could, and certainly not communicating with the public and with the community to set expectations. And I think when we set expectations for the public and we say we're going to do something, unless there is an emergency, an extenuating circumstance, some type of new fiscal reality, we ought to keep those promises. And this is an example where it didn't happen. So I just wanted to express my frustration there. I'm hopeful in the subsequent conversations that we've had that we can resolve this and make sure that the new commitment that has been made, which is now delayed for this particular library, Maggie Nightingale Library in Poolesville, that promise be kept. And I've had many conversations with Councilmember Jawando, who is the library's lead, and look forward to working together with you, Councilmember Jawando, with the rest of our colleagues, and with the community, along with the executive agencies, just to make sure that promises made are promises kept, and that we keep the timelines when we say we're going to do them, and we don't move them around at the last minute without community input, community support. So thank you for allowing me that opportunity to mention that.
Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much. And let me just respond also as the lead of Education and Culture, which oversees libraries, that, the county executive put us in a very difficult situation when it came to this. And so we'll certainly be looking at that. I know that our new approach when it comes to refreshment of our libraries, instead of doing complete renovations, we'll make sure that they happen on a much quicker schedule. And so the communities are actually getting things much faster than they would have. However, it's still not comforting because we know how important libraries are to communities. And so we certainly look forward to working with you, Councilmember Friedson, continuing to make sure that we can deliver on those promises. I did want to highlight just a couple items for my colleagues. And so I've actually arrived, I apologize, 10 minutes late, but hopefully now I've gotten the gist of what happens and what my comments need to be about. I wanted to pull to everyone's attention our Arts and Humanities Council and the NDA that's there and the increases that we approved in the amount of $550,000, and put that in context for you, because for very long we have been continuing to whittle away the arts and humanities, and then just recently started to try and keep them even. But as we talk about this context of building things back up, we've never built back up our arts and humanities. And so this is a small down payment on trying to get us back on track when it comes to, and I know all of us here on the dais have our own individual experiences with the arts, and we know how valuable they are. I don't have to remind you that there are also economic development imperatives as well, beyond just the culture that goes along with it. And so from that perspective, I just really want to call my colleagues' attention to that and make sure that we are supportive of that. And then I also wanted to talk about another item that we have that's on our consent calendar that is incredibly important as well, and that is our Office of Agriculture. And one in which, again, and when we separated out our Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation and left Office of Agriculture, it remained kind of stagnant. And so from that perspective, the small puts and takes that we have on there, including saving our mobile ag lab, are incredibly important as we continue to protect 1/3 of the county's landmass and make sure when it comes to environmental protection and then environmental sustainability, the last thing we want to do is have that agricultural reserve turn into more homes or more development when we know that it's doing great in the hands of our farmers. And so from that perspective, I just wanted to highlight both of those items. I know they're on the consent calendar and we're going to be moving them forward, but as we get to our deliberations around reconciliation, I thought that some added attention was important for those two items. So thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Council President, and just wanted to associate myself with Councilmember Rice's comments related to ag. We sent a letter supporting the restoration of that mobile ag program that serves so many of our schools, and speaking of cost efficiency, it's a good bang for the buck in this budget of $30-something thousand for reaching hundreds of students. I also, to Councilmember Friedson, thank you for bringing up the library issue. It's something we have to look at holistically. There's several other libraries slated for work. Long Branch is slated for a refresh this summer. There's been a lot of movement, and I am interested in working with our colleagues at GSA. I think I saw Mr. Assant here earlier. But to make sure that we get a reliable timeline and those things don't move without community input. And so I'll be working with you on that. Also wanted to highlight that while we approved their budget and it's on the consent calendar, is an item that's very important to me, and I hope to my colleagues, to extend the hours at Long Branch Library and also Damascus, two of our high needs in areas. And that's going to be on the consent calendar or on the reconciliation list, and I think I just wanted to call that out. We need to make sure that those are open, particularly for our communities that need them the most. So thank you, Council President, and look forward to working with my colleagues on that.
Thank you. Okay, I don't see any other lights, so those in favor of adopting the consent calendar, please raise your hand. That is unanimous. Thank you. All right, so now we're going to start our work session, and we do have a number of items. We will begin with item 41, which is the Environmental Protection General Fund. And for that, we do have Mr. Levchenko that has prepared a packet, and I'll turn it over to Councilmember Hucker to begin us.
Thank you, Madam President. The
Well, I guess I'll have more to say later. The T&E committee had a productive work session, filling a program manager 2 position and adding funding for our greenhouse gas reduction mitigation planning. And I'm sure we're going to talk about that, but let me turn it over to Mr. Levchenko, and with your permission, and have him walk us through the packet.
Okay.
Yeah, there are a couple items that required some subsequent discussion after the T&E committee discussion. First, I did want to mention a Fed committee recommendation to move or shift $5,000 from the Office of Agriculture budget to DEP for the production of the Champion Tree Directory. So certainly the Fed committee members can speak to that. That would be a shift from general fund to general fund. So we are not reflecting it on the reconciliation list, but just as a shift between the department budgets. But since it occurred after the T&E committee discussion, I wanted to reference it here so that the council is aware of that shift.
All right, is there anything that we need to do in terms of that shift?
We'll just reflect that in the tracking numbers going forward.
Okay, thank you. And I want to acknowledge that Mr. Ortiz, who's the Director of the Department of Environmental Protection, is here, as well as Ms. Hochberg, who is the Assistant Chief Administrative Officer. Welcome to the 2 of you as well. I don't know that I have you on my list, but let me quickly turn to Mr. Ortiz in case you have any remarks that you want to make.
No, I just want
I
to,
saw you turn on the microphone, and I thought you wanted to say something.
well, because I usually forget when you ask for me to respond to something. But no, on behalf of the department and the executive branch, greetings and wishing everybody a happy and prosperous budget season.
Well, thank you so much.
Motion to adjourn.
We are very, I think we're still standing, so halfway through it, right? So I appreciate that, those words of encouragement. We might need it as we are in the final stretch. All right, Mr. Levchenko.
Sure. The other main item of interest to the committee that requires further discussion is funding that's currently on the reconciliation list for some additional climate change activity in FY20. This is really a follow-up to the Climate Mobilization Work Group report from last year, which identified a large number of items that the county needs to consider in order to meet its revised greenhouse gas reduction goals. And in addition to that, we also have adaptation issues that we want to address as well. The committee included 2 items, each at $200,000 on the reconciliation list for that. The committee also had heard from the executive branch staff that they were looking to identify FY19 dollars that could be applied to this effort. And the assumption with the $400,000 was that that would be combined with dollars from FY19. Subsequent to that meeting, we've of course heard that through the county's 3rd quarterly analysis, there are some expenditure issues there, and we're a little bit behind from where we were before. So there is some concern about whether those additional dollars in FY19 will in fact be there. And if not, the committee was interested in reconsidering the total amount recommended on the reconciliation list for FY20. So we did invite executive staff here to give us the latest on their FY19 dollar search efforts for this, and also maybe a little bit more about where their thoughts are on moving forward with this initiative in FY20. So we have our climate policy director here, as well as obviously our DEP director and staff.
Okay. Ms. Hochberg, anything? Please press the mic. Yeah, there's a.
Good morning, President of our own council members. I'd like to thank you for your shared interest in getting climate planning off the ground here in the county. As Keith mentioned, over the last month, I worked with departments to come up with about $400,000 of fiscal year 19 operating funds to be used towards climate planning. However, due to an emerging need to close a fiscal year 19 operating budget gap, we will unfortunately not be able to allocate these funds towards climate planning this fiscal year. Looking ahead to fiscal year 20, based on what other comparable jurisdictions have done, I think that we can accomplish our fiscal year 20 climate planning work with about $400,000, and that additional funds beyond $400,000 are not needed. The funding amount needed all depends on the scope of what we do, and so if you'd like, I can walk you through our plans for FY20.
Just to recap, so what you're saying, so you're telling us that the $400,000 for FY '20, which have been included in the executive's request?
FY '19.
Okay, but she just said that for FY '20,
Right, it's gone.
that there are $400,000 that have been identified. Is that what you're saying?
It was.
We have not identified 400,000
FY
in
'20.
FY '20, but we think that our work can be completed in FY '20 with 400,000.
Okay, so the county executive did not include $400,000 for FY '20.
That's
But the
correct.
department, or you have identified and you have concluded that with $400,000, that you can do the work that is
Yes.
needed. And the T&E committee has placed on the reconciliation list $400,000. I just wanted to make sure that this is on record, because it is interesting that if the executive has identified a particular target amount for such important work that we have all vowed we're going to do, it is odd that the council has to place it on the reconciliation list, which means that now we have to identify those resources within the budget, which is difficult because at the end of the day, we really don't have a lot to work with. So I just wanted to highlight that, because it is really critical that especially our constituents who care so much about this issue understand to the lengths that we, the council, are going to have to go to make sure that we fund this very important initiative. But really do appreciate your candor in terms of letting us know exactly how much. And I do want to note that we did receive a memo from the executive that also expressed that $400,000 would be what we need to do. So the council is going to do everything in its power to find that money. But obviously, it's always difficult once we get the budget, so. Okay. Anything else, Mr. Levchenko, or?
Those are the only items that the committee needed follow-up on. Certainly, if the council had other questions regarding the DEP General Fund, we do have folks here that can speak to
Okay.
that, but staff did not have any other issues to raise.
Thank you. Councilmember Reamer.
Madam President, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I thought I had the floor earlier, but
Oh.
could you clarify what you think we're doing then on the 400,000? Because
Well,
we
I
haven't had this
understand that
discussion.
I understand that the T&E committee had placed that on the reconciliation
We
list?
put 400,000, the advocacy community believes the need is 800,000. The administration has consistently said they could do it within 400,000, and the memo so states that we received, I think, at 9 o'clock last night. We put the additional 400,000 on the rec list, just to be clear, with the assumption there'd be this 400,000 in the current budget. Since we know now that will be spent on other things, I believed we had to have a discussion about what we wanted to put on the rec list, whether we were going to stick with the 400,000 of the committee's recommendation based on previous circumstances, or whether we were going to try and address this gap.
You are the chair of the T&E committee, so I think that now we just heard that the executive believes that with $400,000 that that's going to be enough. But as chair of the T&E committee and members of the T&E committee as well, you have been discussing this item very, deeply. And if it is your desire to place another $400,000, then we can discuss that. But
Well, I don't
Kind of.
mean to belabor this, but I think, this is, a surprise that this money was taken away from the, subsequent to the committee's deliberations on this. So, Ms. Hochberg, I'm glad you're here. I wish Mr. Klein were here. I do believe at some point we ought to have some discussion about oversight of current directors and the cause of the emerging FY19 budget gap, and management of them. But in the meantime, you mentioned many neighboring and other not neighboring jurisdictions that have spent money on climate consultants and staff in recent years to do their climate planning. What's your best approximate estimate for how much the climate planning will cost the county?
So our number one priority is to do a climate mitigation plan, which is a roadmap of prioritized actions for meeting our community-wide greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. For that work, I believe ballpark that we can get that done with about $150,000 of consultant work. And that's based on what Washington, D.C. has done with their Clean Energy D.C. plan, as well as what King County, Washington has done with actually fewer dollars. If, in addition to climate mitigation, if we also look at including climate adaptation tasks to our plan, then the total amount, I believe, would be closer to $400,000 if we look at both climate mitigation and climate adaptation.
Thank you. Mr. Levchenko,
I'm a little nervous about if we add more money for this challenge, that being rated for other budget needs in the future. And is it possible to create a new NDA to make sure that this is fenced off for climate planning and climate solutions in the future?
I mean, the council has done that in the past. In fact, I believe we had a climate change NDA about 10 years ago. So certainly that is one way, if you have targeted resources for a very defined task, we could work with our colleagues in the executive branch to create a non-departmental account for that. This is intended to be, at least this effort would be a one-time effort. And we do one-time efforts as well in departments, so we can track that. So it can work either way. It's really, the council does have a little bit more sort of appropriation fencing around an NDA, certainly.
Right.
Because the council appropriates by those categories, but it really can work either way.
I would suggest we do that, because I think DEP in particular has been a target where it's a skinny agency, it has a lot of lapsed positions, it is not the source of our budget challenges, and many of their positions for years have been funded through the water quality protection charge and not the general fund, and that has caused some consternation on the part of the county council. I should thank some of our guests for attending the Beltway Town Hall this weekend, to sort of speak out against the greatest climate threat facing the county at this point. Let me just share with my colleagues a couple thoughts that I have. It's true that solving our climate crisis is incredibly important, and it's as important or more important than anything on the rec list. It's also true the rec list has gotten far too big this year, and that most of the things on the rec list, numerically, regardless of how much we care about them, won't get funded. But I feel like we're in this unfortunate position where the committee essentially appropriated $800,000 thinking $400,000 was coming from the executive branch, and now it's been taken away. And I want to be faithful to the will of the committee at that point. So I wish we had a better cost estimate for what this would take, despite asking for it for weeks. And I do want to say to my friends in the advocacy community, and I say this as a career environmental advocate, while it's helpful to know what other jurisdictions have spent, the goal is not to spend the most money on a report for consultants. The goal is to have the best report that gives us the most useful recommendations so we can reduce the most carbon and other greenhouse gases. And the more money we spend on a report, doing so doesn't reduce carbon at all. The more money we spend on a report, the less money will actually be available to other climate solutions in the future. So I'm comfortable recommending to my colleagues another $400,000 to replace the $400,000 that was taken away by the executive branch, as long as we can fence it off, we can make sure any money that's not spent on the report is spent on actual climate solutions. And I want to do the most cost-effective report. I think I'm willing to fund that, and I very much appreciate the focus on efficiency. There's a lot of ways we could spend money to address the climate crisis, and it does make great sense to be planful and to know the most appropriate and efficient expenditure of resources. But that focus on efficiency should include the report as well. The goal isn't to spend the most, it's to spend the least and get the best report, like everything else in government. So that's my suggestion, is that we replace the $400,000 on the rec list, and we fence it off so that that money is used for climate solutions and not for any other emerging budget gap that emerges in the future. And we do that, as I said, in the committee. I think the language needs to be clear that we're spending money on agency staff as well as consultants, and not fencing it off for consultants. If we can do this without consultants, that's even better. But we definitely don't want to advertise to consultants how much money we're putting on this, because then in a competitive bidding process, those are the bids you're going to get, is right at that level. So anyway, that's my motion, to replace this on the rec list as long as it goes to other climate solutions.
So let me clarify. So you're saying to another $400,000 on the rec list. Although that $400,000 for FY19, isn't that still in the base?
it's been taken for the budget gap.
They've said they've needed that to address the shortfall from their recent third quarter analysis.
Okay, and so therefore, if we do manage to get these $800,000 off the reconciliation list between that time and how quickly is this NDA that's supposed to be walled off, is that there's gonna be enough time to do that? I mean, I'm just worried that then next year we might be back here with the same story, that the money then had to be used to close a gap.
Well, the NDA would be effective July 1st for FY '20, and we
So
would,
you're gonna work on that, and so that by the time that we make our final decision on the budget, there would be an NDA specific for this? Is that what we're doing?
yes, yeah, we'll work with our colleagues in the executive branch to create that NDA, and that would be appropriated directly by the council as part of its operating budget resolution later this month.
All right, so I believe I heard Councilmember Hucker make a motion and Councilmember Reamer seconded. Is that right? That's what okay, so we do have that motion for $400,000 to be placed on the rec list. I just want to do a quick check. I have a lot of lights. Do people want to discuss that particular proposal? Okay, before we vote. Okay, great. So I'm going to turn to Councilmember Reamer because he was in line, turned off his light to defer to Councilmember Hucker. I'm going to bring him back. Okay.
Thank you, Council President Navarro. Wanted to just start by expressing appreciation and agreement with your comments when the Council President began this dialogue. It is disappointing that we have an initiative, we have such a great need to tackle climate issues. I think we generally have agreement that there is a climate emergency and we need to be doing everything possible, and yet the executive hasn't made sure that there's funding to take this on. And I know partly the problem is the executive wasn't convinced that we needed to add funding at all, and the executive said that we could possibly just take care of this in-house. But I've never seen any proposal for what that would be. I've never really seen a lot of executive branch initiative about what kind of planning really needs to happen. What I'm getting is a lot of feedback from outside organizations that are pressing us to fulfill our policy goal, which is to get to zero emissions and to address the emergency that we have. So I am frustrated that no FY19 funding was identified and no FY20 funding was proposed. And let's not forget, it's not just that the FY19 money was, removed, but after we asked for it to be found, but then no funding was proposed in the budget generally for FY20, and I really disagree with that. Here's a couple examples of why. We're spending millions of dollars a year right now supporting LEED buildings. How much benefit is there really compared to other things we could spend that money on? What about the money we spend on power generation? Is that enough? Could we spend more on power generation? What would be the relative benefit of spending more on power generation for our goal of reducing emissions? What about our benchmarking initiative? Could we do more in the benchmarking initiative to work with private property owners so that they can make the changes that they need to reduce emissions from their own electricity consumption? What about electric buses? I've recommended, my colleagues have supported putting a number of electric buses on the reconciliation list, which I really appreciate. They're expensive. I think, they do reduce emissions, but I don't know yet how much do they reduce emissions relative to other measures that we could take. And so we're asking the council now to spend $1 million on more electric buses. At the same time, we don't know if the best thing to spend money on might be more power generation, renewable power generation, or perhaps more benchmarking, building owner outreach, or other initiatives. What about the incinerator? What is the role of the incinerator in this conversation? The executive has basically said that's his #1 environmental priority, is shutting down the incinerator. Now, I know that's an air quality issue because there's emissions that are dirty, that get into our breathing, to the air we breathe. But what is the relative impact of that on the climate and carbon emissions driving climate change? I don't know that we have an answer for that. But yet the executive branch is driving towards spending millions of dollars to shut down the incinerator, but it might be that the best thing to spend that millions of dollars on would be something more effective to reduce carbon emissions. We don't really know. What about pesticides? There's many advocates in the environmental community advocating on pesticides. What's the relative environmental issue in this conversation, I think climate is the issue. We have a climate emergency. Our children have already inherited a world that is different than the one that I grew up in. And it's terrible. It is horrible, and we need to do something. Well, I think the environmental community is heavily focused on climate, but should we be spending more money on other environmental initiatives? Or should we be spending our money to reduce carbon emission? Composting. Composting probably might have a big benefit, right? Because there's a lot of methane gas. Methane might be one of the best things for us to focus on. I don't know. But we'll find out with the right kind of planning. So I feel that the best planning process is the one that gets the most answers. And what we've seen in other jurisdictions is studies that have cost anywhere upwards of $1.5 million. You know, Fairfax's initiative apparently is $1.5 million. So I think that you can't really know at the outset what the right number is. I don't think it's $150,000 personally. I don't think doing 10% of the planning and evaluation that Fairfax did is likely to get us the kind of study that we really need. But meanwhile, again, this is about being penny wise, not pound foolish. All the other money we're spending on environmental initiatives, we need to know that that's money well spent. And so this evaluation tool would really help us. So I strongly support the need for $800,000. It was my motion at committee that we needed $800,000. We thought that the executive branch had $400,000 sequestered. That funding is no longer available, so we need to add another $400,000 so that $800,000 will be available. I agree. I'm glad to support an NDA. I would like to think that if we appropriated $800,000 to DEP, that money would remain. I'm less concerned that money would be rated, but I'm happy to support an NDA to fulfill this important work.
Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Madam President. You know, it's frustrating once again as we hear conversations from the county executive about a commitment to climate change. I didn't run on climate change. I didn't run on a greener economy. I didn't run on saying that this was an emergency, although I feel that in my heart. It's just not what I ran on. And it's very frustrating to see a person who ran on these types of things who then comes back and says to us, well, I'm not going to put this as a priority. I ran on education, and I've always run on education ever since, and education's always been a priority. And so when the county executive didn't fund education, one of the things he also said he was a champion of, I criticized and said, why would you do this? This is an education last budget. All of my advocates for climate change who lean on this council day in and day out should also be leaning on this county executive who has failed you. I will just say, because again, if you're asking for these things could have easily be had, and let me tell you how. We have a budget that we're dealing with right now that deals with compensation. For a very small adjustment in compensation, he could have funded the $800,000 for climate change and then some. He chose not to do that. Those are choices, and everybody has choices and need to be held accountable to their choices. All I hope is that the advocates in the community hold accountable the county executive just as you do us when it comes to choices. I think that this is money well spent. As a person who formerly chaired the Chesapeake Bay Water Resource Policy Committee and who is a member along with Mr. Ortiz, and we've sat together and talked about the issues regarding what we need to do for our greater regional communities when it comes to making sure that our climate becomes a better place for all. We've seen what our investment in terms of the environment does when it comes to the healthiness of the Chesapeake Bay. The Maryland crab population is booming and doing better only because of the efforts that we make regionally to make a difference. So money invested can make a difference and make a change. That's the very interesting thing about this, folks. We have proof. And so I'm not going to stand in the way and say I oppose something like this. I don't. I think that this is money well invested. I'm just a little bit frustrated that it didn't come from the county executive, who once again is having us pit all of these very important things against each other. It's put us in a very precarious position in trying to choose between all kinds of things that we know are incredibly important to every single person in this community. So thank you, Madam President.
Councilmember Joando.
Thank you, Madam President. Share some of my colleagues' concern with, this council, the previous council passed the climate emergency resolution. The county executive was on that council, and I'm sure he voted for that. And it doesn't add up to me either that this can be a top priority, and there is nothing in the budget in FY19 or 20 proposed to address a plan for climate change. Could you answer why that is the case?
What I can say is that I arrived at the administration after the budget was already finalized for FY20. And so I got to work trying to identify fiscal year 19 funds. And for a minute, I thought, great.
You were happy. You thought you had them.
I was happy. It was good. Unfortunately, with the FY19 budget gap that is, an issue right now, the funds that I had identified had to be used.
We're
to
taking.
meet
And
this
look,
budget
I
gap.
know you're a team player. You just came in. I was happy to vote for you. I think you're going to do a great job. Same with Mr. Ortiz. It just that the math doesn't add up. But we're gonna do what we can here on the council to restore it. The second question I have is the delta between 150,000, or if you add the mitigation plan that you mentioned and the adaptation plan together, that gets you to 400,000 that you said you think you could secure. What are we missing? What's the 600,000 to 800,000 that other jurisdictions paid for to get additional information? What other components of their plan, in addition to the climate mitigation and climate adaptation plan, did they pay for?
I would have to look specifically at what these other jurisdictions have done. One thing that I would venture to guess is that perhaps some of the consultants in other jurisdictions maybe took a bigger role in facilitating community engagement, maybe staffing technical work groups, and some of the organizations or jurisdictions that have been able to complete their plans with fewer dollars use more in-house staff to do some of that work.
And that would be the model that you would envision us and DEP taking where we could do the community engagement in-house? I don't know if that's for Mr. Ortiz or for you, but is that
That's
what?
correct.
Okay. I think it'd be very helpful. I'm sure maybe the T&E committee already requested it, but to the full council to see how you planned on spending this $800,000 or any amount of money towards the plan, and a breakdown of that. I think it's great if we can do the work internally, particularly community engagement. I think it's better to have people that actually work for the county doing community engagement. It creates longer ties as opposed to a consultant who pops in and pops out. So that's good if that's part of it. But I imagine that 600 to 800,000 is more than just community engagement. So I'd be interested in seeing what else did they do. Not that we need to copy them exactly, but let's make sure we get the best possible information and have the best line items so that we can act on it. And I agree with some of my other colleagues that there's a lot of money we spend on a lot of things, but we need to be very focused on our climate plan and get the most bang for the buck. So if you could please, and council staff, if we could get that back, Keith, I think the full council will benefit from that. Obviously, T&E committee will take a lead. But I'm supportive of the additional funding. I'm a supporter of the NDA, and I hope that we can get moving on this in earnest.
Absolutely. We're currently drafting a statement of work for a consultant, and I'll be happy, to the extent I'm able to share that, I'll be happy to share that with the council before it's fully baked in. I want to make sure that we're all on the same page about where this is headed. And then just one more item I'd like to share is that there may be some opportunities for the county to apply for state and federal grant funds through the Office of Emergency Management and Homeland Security, particularly as it applies to the climate adaptation side of things. So that would enable us to leverage some outside funds for this work.
That's great. It's obviously, we're in an emergency, so we need as much help as we can get. So thank you all very much.
Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, and a lot of what I wanted to say has been said, so I'll try to be as brief as I can. One, I just wanted to clarify, are we going back to two $400,000 tranches? Is that formally what the motion is?
My understanding is another $400,000, right?
So adding an addition, I just want to make sure, because 800 has been used, I just want to make sure. Two tranches of 400,000.
There's $400,000 on the reg list.
In
And the
two
motion-
tranches.
Two tranches. And the motion is to add another 400,000. It was not specified if it was going to be in two tranches or if it's just 400,000. Another two tranches.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify. Thank you for that. I'm glad how the council president started this. I appreciate the additional comments that have been made reflecting it. I think this is a challenge. We all support the climate challenges that we face, and those challenges have to be met with a commitment. And commitments require funding, and budgets reflect those priorities. And I feel like, sharing some of the frustrations of my colleagues that the reality hasn't necessarily been matched, with, the rhetoric that has been used over the course of not only the campaign, but since, the few months that we've been in the roles that we've been in. And that's incredibly frustrating. And, this really isn't a way to budget. The way that it's supposed to work is we're supposed to have a proposal. The proposal is supposed to come with a fully baked idea. That fully baked idea is then supposed to be, carefully considered in a robust, public, transparent, accountable manner. That's not what we're having here, unfortunately. And so I'm supportive as well. I share the thoughts of my colleagues that I support putting a commitment into this effort. But I also share the significant frustrations that have been shared here that, to Ms. Hochberg, no good deed goes unpunished. I am curious, here it was, you doing your job that you were hired to do, to look across all county agencies specifically on the issue of a greener county. Specifically what we're talking about here, considered to be one of the top priorities of this county executive. You did exactly what was asked of you, reflecting also the interest of the council, and the money was taken immediately after you found it, it seems. I'm just curious, who made that decision? How was that decision made once you identified the money, that the money wouldn't be available for these purposes?
All I can say is that with the third quarter, financial outlook, it emerged that our fiscal year 19 operating budget is, we have a significant gap that needs to be filled. And so that was the priority for the administration.
So that was the priority above this priority?
I believe because for anti-deficiency reasons, the county cannot continue to have a budget gap.
Was there any conversation similar to what you did, specifically for money in, that could be repurposed for these purposes to, address the climate emergency? Were there similar efforts across other agencies, maybe outside of your span of control, to look into the seat cushions and look into the underneath the sofa and find funds to solve that gap so that this money could stay in the area where you had identified it, which would have reflected the will of the Transportation and Environment Committee and shown a commitment from the administration that this was a priority for him?
My understanding is that all of these available funds under the seat cushions are being used towards, filling that budget gap.
Okay. Well, like I said, getting a memo 12 hours before, this is not your fault, Ms. Hochberg. Like I said, you did everything that was asked of you, and I appreciate all of your efforts. I do sympathize, frankly, for the fact that, you did what we all had wanted, and now that money is not going to where you had hoped it would go to do the work that you had signed up to do. And so I sympathize for that, and Mr. Ortiz as well, but I share the concern, and I share the frustration, and I think that this does not reflect well on the administration of this being a priority, and doesn't reflect well on the county of a process that is accountable, that is transparent, that has the type of robust public discussions of how the money that we spend is utilized in a way that reflects our priorities, in a way that reflects our values. And so I'm hopeful that we do much better, and I look forward to working with my colleagues to hold our administration to that effort.
Councilmember Glass.
Thank you, Madam President. As a member of the T&E committee, I am frustrated. I think that's the best word to use, that we're here having this conversation today. And I feel like Charlie Brown when Lucy grabs the football at the last minute, because we've been going through this budget session this season, and here we are having this conversation this late in the game. But I want to take a step back and look holistically at what we're talking about and let everybody know that there are other items in the budget that have caused me, my colleagues, members of the T&E committee, particularly other concerns regarding inaction or withdrawal from action regarding climate activities and protecting our environment. Within the transportation budget, the executive budget actually cut funding to public transportation. And the T&E committee has added money to restore funding for public transportation, recognizing that the routes that had been proposed to be cut were among the highest performing routes. And if we make them less attractive, more people will flee our public transportation system and get into their vehicles. And that's an important component of this conversation. And as Councilmember Raymer said, there's also items for expanding our electric bus fleet. There are also items to expand access to public transportation, particularly for our youth. And the youth have a nationwide grassroots organization called 0 Hour. And it's a marvelous thing to see youth activists fighting to protect the climate that they have inherited and that we all needs to be preserved. But as they're fighting within 0 Hour, here we are at the 11th hour fighting for our climate back home. And so I am supportive of the efforts to add $400,000 into the reconciliation list. I appreciate my colleagues' questions regarding what the $400,000 and $800,000 would have been used for. And so with that said, I support all of these motions and just want everyone to know that outside of this particular line item, we're fighting for more. And we have your back.
Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And, you know, I think we can all, and I'm not going to repeat what has been said, I think we can all understand that the money is very tight, and this budget process is not the best budget process that we could ever have, and we need to look at this in the entire budget in a systemic way, not just on this issue. I am supportive of the additional $400,000. I agree with Councilmember Hucker. The number itself, the amount of money that we're talking about, really is an important number, but we need to have the proper number to get the job done, and that's what we don't. You've looked at it, and I appreciate what you've done, and I sincerely think that we need to fence off dollars so that we don't keep going back through this and all of the things that have been said. But I do think it would be a good thing to go back to the county executive and say, look, we understand that for FY19 you couldn't find $400,000, but you might have found you might have only subtracted $300,000. We might not. There might be some other money that he could figure out to send back over to us for FY19 rather than take the entire $400,000 from us. There's maybe should be, even though it would be a lesser sum, it would certainly be a significant sum to us. So I ask, please, that you go back and ask that as well. And I do think that what we need to do, as I said in the beginning, is a systemic approach. We need, and we've talked about a 2-year model for a budget to some degree with a hybrid. We need to start doing that, because what we're doing is we're always chasing another dollar, and that means you have to take another dollar from somebody else. And all of the areas that we work on are important. The climate certainly, if we don't have a good climate, maybe the other areas won't be here to have. So we need to make certain that the other areas that we work on have proper funding as well. We need to figure out a better way to do this, and I'm supportive of the $400,000.
Councilmember Hucker.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to my colleagues for their support. I wish we all weren't in this position. I think everything's been said, but just let me also try to clarify a little bit. And Ms. Hochberg, please tell me if I'm wrong. My assumption is we don't need to reinvent the wheel, that other jurisdictions have done very good work in this area, King County, New York, LA, et cetera. We all have similar sources of carbon. We all know what the big ones are. And we produce them to different degrees, but we need to have a Montgomery County report. But we should be building on the research that's been done, the conclusions that have been drawn, the recommendations that are in other reports in other cities. There's often financial benefits to not being the first in an area, and we should be able to build on the good staff and consulting work that's been done elsewhere. And I made my motion knowing that I hope we don't spend all $800,000. I hope we don't even spend $400,000, and that you have more money to spend on actual climate solutions, because writing a report doesn't reduce carbon at all. It only tells us where to apply additional money to reduce carbon in the future. So I agree with what you said. I was going to ask for the same thing. I hope we can work together in consultation, A, to deliver this report within a year, year and a half, because we need to take action quickly, and two, I would very much like to see, as Mr. Joando mentioned, the scope of work, any high-level requirements that go out, any work plan that's been done for current DEP staff in this area, because I really don't want to be back here reviewing a report that's deficient and saying this is not what we thought we were going to get, and now we need to spend more money to do something else. I want to go into it with our eyes open and make sure we're getting what we're paying for. So, isn't that true? You have any problem with any of that?
I agree completely on the need to look at best practices, not only throughout the country, but internationally. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can, take advantage of what others have already done.
Right. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Albornoz?
Thank you, Madam President. As my colleagues have noted, I think everything's been said. I'm not going to pile on. I've been there. I know how difficult these decisions are. I would just recommend a couple of things moving forward. One, regarding climate change and acknowledging it's such a complex issue that goes well beyond just DEP, that the executive branch consider a budget cluster approach moving forward as difficult decisions are made with regards to reductions, but also on how best to leverage precious resources with corresponding agencies. We did that in the previous administration around youth development and around senior issues, and I think got to a better place because we did work collaboratively among agencies, and that should be something facilitated by the Office of Management and Budget. But that'd be one way of addressing Councilmember Glass's point, which is reductions in transportation and in other areas have a cascading effect that impacts climate change as a whole. So that'd be one recommendation. And the second, and I do support the additional $400,000 tranche, is that the development of the report, the process that we followed to get to that report and an operational strategic plan will have to have the buy-in, not just within county government, but of our private nonprofit sectors as well. And so I'm sure that if we are able to find these additional resources, or I would hope that the plan considers and brings in all of those players so that we don't just come up with a report, but an actual operational document that people have bought into through its process and we can implement realistically. Thank you.
Okay, so we do have an amendment or a recommendation to place $400,000, two tranches of $200,000, totaling $800,000 on the reconciliation list, with the caveat that an NDA will be created to make sure that these funds are utilized for those particular purposes. All those in favor of that recommendation, please raise your hand. That is unanimous. And now, I guess we need to vote on the rest of the. Right, so, although we do have a committee recommendation, which has been now amended. All those in favor, Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you. Now that we've dispensed of that, I just wanted to mention one thing and highlight it for my colleagues' attention. That is a key county executive change, shifting Conservation Corps from Health and Human Services to our Department of Environmental Protection, which I think is incredibly smart. I just want to make sure that my colleagues in DEP understand that not only do I see this as an important component, but personally I've seen young men and women who've gone through this program who are now giving back across the nation and doing conservation work across the nation. We've done stories on this through our own council media and talked about and highlighted the great work that goes on. We've never expanded really this program and what it can do. And when you talk about making sure that our younger generation understands and appreciates what is happening with climate change, it's great to have the folks that are here in front of us, but we need to have young people involved in really pushing this forward as well, and especially young people of color. which we see are in our community who are oftentimes disparaged most by what happens with climate change. And so from that perspective, Conservation Corps takes a bite at that and tries to make some of that different. But I'd really like to see us grow and expand. So as you take this on, I look forward to working with you, working with my colleagues in T&E, but also with Education and Culture Committee to make sure that we're really focused on getting our young people more engaged and involved. So I look forward, Director Ortiz, to working in partnership with you on that. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you so much for mentioning that. I think it's so important, especially as we are looking at green jobs as a major segment of our economy. And at least hopefully this is something that might come out of the federal discussions. We shall see. But I think it's very fitting that it would be placed there to develop those skill sets that are so needed. All right, so I think I don't see any other lights. So with that, all those in favor of adopting the budget, please raise your hand. These are straw votes. This is unanimous. Thank you so much, Mr. Ortiz, Ms. Hochberg. We look forward to continuing our work with you. And we have another item as well. I guess you're still going to stay for this other item, right? All right, let's go right into that then. Well, we still look forward to working with you for the general fund piece. Now we're going to go to solid waste services and turn it again over to Councilmember Hucker.
Thank you, Madam President. Mr. Weiner, we made you stay through all that climate action, and I'm sure you're prepared. The committee recommended a few changes. One, we approved the solid waste collection fund that was recommended by the county executive. We approved the solid waste disposal fund with the change of reducing disposal fund expenditures by $1,435,000 to reflect additional electricity sales revenue from the expected sale of renewable energy credits. And we made a few changes regarding nonprofits in the solid waste budget. I don't know, Keith, am I stepping on your report here?
Well, yeah, you mentioned that the support for the collection fund and the disposal fund with some reduced expenditures that the executive staff concurred with. Those were not cuts that the committee identified that were that have an impact on programs. The one outstanding issue that the committee did discuss at the meeting was the appropriateness of having funding for nonprofits within the solid waste disposal fund. This issue has come up a couple times over the years. And the committee did feel there is, as I've noted in the packet, there's funding in the 19 approved solid waste disposal fund budget of $139,920 for a wider circle. They also do have funds they receive elsewhere in the county budget. And that's part of what we were looking at was, is there a more appropriate place for those funds? And the committee asked staff to look at that, and staff did. And based on where the funds are allocated now in 19, staff felt that the Department of Housing and Community Affairs General Fund was the more appropriate place for a couple of reasons. One, the primary mission of organizations like A Wider Circle is human services, addressing needy populations, issues of poverty, things like that. There may be a side benefit to that of reduced waste going through the solid waste system, but that really is an ancillary benefit, not a primary purpose or goal of these organizations. And that's the primary reason why staff felt that these funds are best allocated in a more of a human service area. And the other issue also is there are a lot of organizations that may have these same ancillary benefits, and I don't think we want to necessarily pick one over another for funding in this way. So I think going forward, that was staff's concern. The issue, though, is obviously when you move dollars from the solid waste disposal fund to the DHCA general fund, you have a general fund impact. And the process the council uses during the budget process for that would be to put those dollars on the reconciliation list. Well, two issues there. One, this organization is receiving dollars in FY19. So if those dollars were not to come off the reconciliation list, the organization would then see a cut. So that's issue number one. And issue number two that you've already talked about is the reconciliation list has gotten pretty large. So there's certainly no guarantees putting items on the reconciliation list that they will come off. So that's the conundrum that the committee was in. And so staff did identify what it feels is a more appropriate place, but that does put the committee in a difficult position of those dollars being at risk on the reconciliation list. And so that's why we're back today for the committee to, with that information, to decide how it wants to move forward with this particular issue today. Whether it wants to add those dollars to the reconciliation list, or alternatively support the executive recommendation in some form. But as staff noted, going forward, staff does feel, just from the budgeting principle itself, that we should move away from allocating what I would argue is unrelated dollars within the solid waste disposal fund.
Right.
Is it possible to include language in the budget resolution to the effect that the council will not consider funding, nonprofit organizations through this for next fiscal year's budget? Is that something that we can do?
We thought about that in the past. The miscellaneous provisions apply to this year, so they would not be binding for next year. So yes, we could put language in, but it would be it would not bind the executive or future council regarding FY21 or beyond.
But it could signal.
It
that-
does.
Because it is odd, I'll be honest with you, I did not realize that we were funding nonprofit organizations through this fund. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me, so that needs to be cleaned up.
Right.
So I don't know if it's possible for us to just include language that signals what we want to do, and then if there's another, I don't know what would be the mechanism for us to perhaps then come back and definitively be able to put something in place that, prohibits that.
Madam
I
President?
think certainly the council could also write to the executive, get it in writing that for next year, the council supports the executive finding a more appropriate source of funding for these dollars.
Yeah.
So at a minimum, we could do that. Like I said, I'm not sure of the practical impact of putting something into miscellaneous provisions this year. We could do that, but like I said, I don't think it would not have any kind of, other than signaling, it would not have any practical impact on FY21.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Hucker, yes.
Yeah, Madam President, Keith correctly described the dilemma. This has been going on for a few years. The goal, I don't think any of us want, is to cut a wider circle, but rather to address the inappropriateness of funding nonprofits through the Solid Waste Disposal Fund. As Mr. Reamer correctly said, the wider circle doesn't encourage people to bring junk that's for disposal over to wider circle, but stuff that should not be going to a landfill, should be used by a needy family. So while we didn't want to, at the time of the committee hearing, we charged Mr. Levchenko with talking to other staff of other committees to see if money could be transferred around between a couple funds. In fact, that doesn't seem like a good option. So our preference is to leave it there for this year, and then to write a stern letter to the county executive urging that it be put in the FY21 budget in the future, that amount of funding for a wider circle, and that's been signed by the members of the T&E committee.
Okay, so is there a desire for the entire council to signal
beg your pardon.
that we support this, so that it is then on record that for next year, we will not be supporting funding for nonprofit organizations from this fund? So
Yeah.
are you seeking support from the
We're
entire
happy to
council
send this
signal
draft letter
that?
around. Yeah, we could probably take a vote on that, the intention of the council, and we could get all the
Is
council
there any
members on this
objection with,
letter.
you have objections? Okay, we will go through the list then. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. So again, I think the specific matter before us is not to support the committee's recommendation, but to go back to the executive's recommendation, which includes the funding for a wider circle. Isn't that right, Keith?
Well, the committee did not make a recommendation on
Okay,
this.
we did not have a
Right.
recommendation.
We asked
All
them
right,
what
great.
they
So
do.
we don't need to take an action.
Yeah.
Right.
But we do, I think, generally agree that many of us agree that this was not the right way to fund a wider circle. I will say, I wouldn't go so far as to say there can be no nonprofit that is funded here, because if there was a nonprofit that truly provided waste stream diversion, other things that actually save money
As their mission. or
as their
part of their
mission, then it
primary
might be,
Right,
it might be
that's-
appropriate.
Right,
So,
that's what I'm
yes,
referring to.
I know that's what you mean.
Yes.
I just wanted to make that clarification, that it's not that it couldn't happen, it's just that this isn't the one. So,
Correct.
with that said, we'll pass it on.
All right, Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Madam President. And Councilmember Reamer, you took one of my points, but just to emphasize, and it's a segue to the other thing I was going to say, I agree, not the proper role for a wider circle, who's doing great work, and we all want to fund, and I would love to see that money come back to them in the proper format. But I would not want to say that we're prohibiting any potential nonprofit that would be doing solid waste mitigation. So I think that was said, and I think folks agree with that. And to Mr. Ortiz and Mr. Weiner, just specifically, I had recently met, and I'll be following up with you, but since I have you here, I'm going to use the time to mention it now, an effort to take old paint and reused paint, either commercial or residential, which I know you already do and is already processed, but to use it, there's an effort to reuse it, and my understanding is that you can take that paint, even dried paint, and take it and process it and actually use it again. And there's a process where in other parts of the world, in Africa and Central and South America, where there's a company that already does some work with you all, but that is wanting to expand and take more of this paint to actually process it at a reduced fee and not pay the high rates that maybe some contractors charge to dispose of that paint, and they normally just burn it anyway. They're actually taking it and taking what's usable out of it and shipping it overseas to be used again. And obviously that has benefits, but it also could save some money. So you're going to be, if you haven't heard of this yet, I'm going to be sending this person your way, and I'd like you to welcome them with open arms. But I think it's another example of a potential nonprofit. I think this is a for-profit, but business opportunity that could reduce costs for us, but also use it for a social good. So I just want you to be aware of that and agree with my colleagues on the disposition of this funding.
Councilmember Rice.
So I'm about to give away a little bit of my secrets, but in the consignment world, there are folks who are tracking this very carefully in terms of waste diversion, but not even just waste diversion, but also energy diversion and water conservation. So beyond just the fact of donating clothing, of which I have 3 trash bags right now at my front door, that I'm about to take to Interfaith Works. So this is a very interesting conversation. I just talked to Shane about it when I saw him yesterday. And it's not about the money for Interfaith Works, because Interfaith Works will figure out how to support them, but I think it's about the messaging. There's a lot that goes into having folks donate their stuff instead of just throwing it into the trash. And when we talk about the challenges that we face with our existing landfill and the amount of space that we have, encouraging folks and making sure that they have ways in which they can continue to donate their clothes and have them reused is an environmental issue, because it means that folks aren't going and buying new clothes. They're using clothes that have already been made, and so there's less water and energy and materials that are being utilized. There's less trees that are being cut down for the boxes to ship those items to stores. All of this is being tracked right now by consignment companies across the world as a method in which we can say that we as a community can collectively come together around doing our part. And so I just want to be careful about us saying that there's not a connection when I think that there actually is. While it might not be direct in terms of saying, oh, well, that's their primary mission, because it's not. I agree with that wholeheartedly. I just want us to be careful about the message that we're sending, because those folks who have those trash bags of clothes that are sitting by their door, who they just haven't gotten the convenient time to go drop them off at Interfaith Works, we don't want them to say, well, I'm just going to go ahead and throw it in the trash. And we don't want Interfaith Works to say, well, we're now getting less and all that. And I know nobody's saying that Interfaith Works wouldn't remain whole. But if we're going to pay them the money anyway, and at the end of the day, if it's coming out of our overall budget, right, every dollar that the county expends is the county dollar, regardless of where it comes from. And there actually is still a nexus that's there between the environmental benefits of what it is that we're doing, then I think that we might want to be a little bit careful about cutting that tie. Just my opinion, not anything to fall on my sword over, not anything to criticize. I mean, it's fine either way, but I don't know, Mr. Ortiz, if you have any response to that, or if Mr. Weiner has any response to that, but I know how much clothing used to go into landfills that doesn't any longer, because a lot of these organizations are out there. And the little donation areas that are in parking lots throughout Planet Aid and all the other ones that are out there that do that same kind of work, that's one of the main reasons why you don't have as much clothing in our solid waste stream as we do now. The reason why is because of those folks out there doing that work. So I don't know if you want to respond.
Thank you, Councilman. You make a great point. Textiles actually are among the top reusable material of value that ends up getting incinerated or landfilled around the country, around the world. So there absolutely is a nexus. In our Towards Zero Waste study that we're master plan, which we're a little bit more than halfway through, we're focusing on these different diversion streams that have value. Textiles is one of them. What we're finding is that there's always a need for affordable year-round clothing throughout the world. That's why you see Planet Aid and other nonprofits showing up throughout the community. But also there are micro industries that come up when you create opportunity for this material that's low cost or free. You know, we find out in recycling, composting, all sorts of things, and textiles are no different. So what we're finding is that insulation products, industrial uses are finding uses for textiles as well. So I don't want to belabor the point because I know, Madam President, there's other things to talk about today, but I do want to acknowledge that you're on point, Councilman, and I look forward to working with you more on this issue.
Councilmember Rice, when you said that you were going to share your secrets, I thought that you were going to confess that you are a consumer of fast fashion. Because just this week on NPR, there was a report on the environmental impacts of fast fashion. And my husband looked at me and I said, no, I've got things in my closet that I've had for like 15 years. Okay, so because the whole premise was that that we consume way too much fast fashion and that we really needed to slow down and reuse our own clothing, and how polyester is just basically wearing plastic, et cetera. And so anyway, just wondering, but
You've got it. Consignment. I put that out there, and I'll just leave it at that. Consignment is a
well,
big business.
okay. I'll have to give a shout out to my daughters who love fashion, but they really are great consumers of all the thrift stores and everything like that. They do that quite a bit. So I will only add that I think that perhaps we should take a look at the letter because, as has been stated, and I am not opposed to nonprofit organizations that do have a nexus, but then I think that we need to be fair and then advertise this and make sure that other organizations that perhaps have a very strong nexus have an option to access these funds. So maybe we can take a look at the letter and edit it somewhat, because to me, it's just an issue of, if I don't want our nonprofit organizations sector to think that, oh, wait, I didn't know that we had this fund over here that I could have access to, and how come some do and how come some don't? So, Chairman Hucker, I don't know if we can then just circulate the letter and maybe edit it a little bit and then see who wants to support it. Councilmember Hucker.
So I think with that, we can just move.
Councilmember Katz, Vice President Katz, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, first off, I think it should be noted that the bags that we're talking about for the recycling of clothing might be in a black trash bag, but it's not trash. I mean, and so, and clothing and textiles, and yes, Councilmember Rice, even shoes could be used. I'm just saying, I'm not casting anything here before, and it's really, it was probably the first thing that was ever recycled was clothing. People outgrew them and they washed them and they gave them, they called them hand-me-downs, but that's what we did in families for many, many years. But one of the things that this did remind me of is that I was at a recent event for Rebuilding Together, and they were concerned that what the county used to give them a free use of when they were rehabbing someone's home, that everything was donated, or the much was donated, that the county would not charge them for the tipping fees. And now that the county either was looking into or it has started charging for tipping fees, and how this has thrown a great concern to their organization. And I don't know that it's directly affecting this budget, but Adam, if you could look into that, please. I think we need to make certain that the groups that are doing the good work that we need to be done, I mean, they're changing people's lives, that we try to make it as an easy of a path for them as possible. So, okay.
We'll take a look at that.
Thank you.
I'll loop back with you. Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you. All right, so Councilmember Hucker, I think that, anything else?
I have nothing else. I think we can move the committee recommendation with that understanding.
Okay, great. So all those in favor of adopting the committee's recommendation, please raise your hand. That is unanimous among all of us here in this big room.
Yeah, and from north, that's right, from northeast, west, and south.
Yes,
we're all-
unanimous. Thank you so much, Mr. Ortiz. Thank you.
Thank you,
All
Madam
right,
President.
now we're on to item 43, and this item is the General Government Economic Development Project. This is White Oak Science Gateway. Waiting, I'm filibustering here for my colleague to come in. All right, and I'll turn it over to Councilmember
Thank you.
Reamer that chairs the Fed Committee.
Been here 9 years. I think this is the first time I had to run to the dais. I've tried to run away from the dais on many occasions. All right. So this next item is one that has been a little bit confusing for all of us following along. And so I think it'll be helpful to have some substantial discussion here. I had asked Gene, and he was doing this, but I just sort of double emphasized, please try to help explain this in the packet for the outside world so that as I can assure you, if council members don't quite follow it, like who is? So the bottom line is the committee's recommendation for the schedule of when funding is expected for the White Oak Plan is proposed as a best guess of when we think we're going to spend the money. However, if the Global Lifestyle Development Corporation moves faster than our estimate and completes its processes and starts building those roads, we have a contractual obligation to provide funding into that construction program. It's a road sharing club, like it's a cost sharing agreement. Sorry, there's a road club is an old term. Glenn knows what it is. I don't. But
it sounds really
but it seemed appropriate.
Thanks a lot.
It seemed appropriate. It's a cost-sharing agreement. So we're not actually the ones hiring the construction team. It's the private company that's hiring the construction team, and we're writing the check for our share of this. And the private team has the opportunity to go as fast as it wants to go. And when it does, we've already appropriated in the capital budget $40 million for our expected expenses. Now, what you see in this budget is a good faith estimate by the county of when we think that might be needed. The private sector partner might say, well, I'm going to go faster. And that's great. We'll match you whenever you go. But I really want to say, and this is, I think, the most important part that we all have to understand, that this is a good faith estimate of when this money is going to be needed. And that's a faith estimate that we all stand behind. This is not, there's some concern that with the change in this schedule that there is a lack of good faith on the county's part. And that the county is sort of trying to backtrack. And I just want to say that's not the case for me. I don't think it's the case for council members, but I understand the concern and the confusion about the financial particulars of this arrangement, I think, has contributed to that concern. But this is a good faith statement by the county that we're going to spend this money when it's needed. That's the bottom line, is we're going to spend this money when it's needed. What you see here is an estimate of when we think it's needed, but the contractual obligation is in the contract that we signed, and the $40 million is the authority has already been provided. So as soon as GLDC moves forward, the county is going to say, all right, we're writing a check, and then we're going to have to adjust our estimate. Then at that point, it's on us. We made a bad estimate of when that money might be needed, but that doesn't mean we wouldn't be able to provide the money. It just means we got to move things around a little bit, draw from the reserve, whatever it is that we have to do, the CIP reserve, whatever it is that we have to do. Didn't want to go there. I'm not going there. You have a way to do these things. So I just wanted to tee up the conversation in that respect because this has been of great concern. I share the concerns. However, I think the council is committed And I think it would be helpful for council members to express their view on this project. If there is not support for this project, then that should be known, but I believe that it's well known. And with that, I ask for Jean, if you can just walk us through the particulars.
Before you do that, Jean, just wanted to share with my colleagues, I've asked actually Mr. Smith to develop language for a resolution that I will consult with all my colleagues, where we can reaffirm our commitment. I mean, obviously, this was a commitment that the previous council made, and I understand why the community might sometimes, worry a little bit because we are now with a new administration, a new council. So I think just, a resolution just truly affirms what we committed to in the past, which is what Councilmember Reamer has just articulated, would be a great way, in good faith, to signal that we continue that commitment. So I will be sharing that with my colleagues so that maybe we can introduce it. I believe we said next Tuesday. Is that correct? I can't remember.
Sure, we will work expeditiously on that.
Expeditiously, yes, we will. All right.
And I'm
so
looking to the clerk that we will be adding that item to
Yes.
the Thursday agenda.
We will find time.
Tuesday
Space
agenda.
in the agenda to do that, to
I'm
reaffirm our commitment to what we said in the past and the importance of this project for the East County. Thank you. Councilmember Hooker. Jean.
Sure, and I believe Mr. Reamer did actually an excellent job, so I'm only going to highlight a couple items to not clarify, but just to reinforce.
Actually,
He said actually.
despite my expectations, Mr. Reamer,
He said that he had the first time in 9 years he ran to the dais. Maybe that's why he ran up here. I mean,
Exercise.
It's been a long budget season, so
No, Gene,
slip of the word.
We forgive you, Jean.
As Mr. Reamer noted, the General Development Agreement required a $40 million appropriation to the CIP for our portion of the roads. The county's commitment remains true, and the amended CIP as the executive that the Fed Committee reviewed on April 11th. There is still a $40 million appropriation. As Mr. Reamer said, that the ability to spend is there. Mr. Reamer also noted that, obviously the CIP is a 6-year program. That includes many projects, and so what the executive provided and what the Fed Committee is concurring with is that we're trying to do our best estimate of when these monies are needed, so as not to crowd out other projects that are in the CIP. And finally, and I will defer to Mr. Austin, who's here from DGS, we have a participation agreement with GLDC, and based on their requirements in that participation agreement, upon meeting those requirements, they may start reimbursing for these road construction costs. And correct. Once they start reimbursing us, we will begin to reimburse them, and based on that speed, if any adjustments are needed, the executive will likely send over an amendment to reflect those realities. The only other item I'll add is that given, and based on staff's review with DGS and understanding of where we're at in not only fiscal year 19, but where fiscal year 20 is going, there are quite a few boxes that still need to be checked by the private developer before a construction permit is pulled, and that gives us enough time to be able to see where this is going as the biennial CIP comes out in January next year. And again, that's why staff recommended, and I believe the Fed Committee concurred with the executive's recommendation, that this schedule believes is the best faith estimate of when these monies will go out. With that, if there's any questions with participation agreement, I will defer to DGS, but just wanted to highlight the points that Mr. Reamer already made.
Thank you. Councilmember Hooker.
Thank you, Madam President. Well, all of us, as well as the public, have every right to be confused. This has been a somewhat confusing process, a project built by under unusual agreement to begin with. So all the remarks have been very helpful. Can you, Mr. Sanchez, clarify? I guess I have some concern. I know there's certainly a lot of concern in the community about the level of communication and collaboration between the county and GLDC on the project generally. Without getting into a big back and forth about who's responsible, can you help us explain what's taken so long for the county to complete the demolition and the site work on Site 2?
Good morning, Greg Austin, Department of General Services. Just a little bit of background. This is actually the third version of an expenditure schedule that you've seen for this $40 million appropriation. In FY18, when Council approved it, it was in 4 even $10 million tranches, obviously not reflective of reality or a definitive schedule. In FY19, we submitted and Council approved a second version of the expenditure schedule, which is what it is today. And what is proposed is yet another version of the expenditure schedule to, again, as Jean mentioned, to reflect our best estimate as to the timing of the expenditures. And Gene also mentioned really the operative word here is reimbursement. This is not the county building a roadway project as you typically see in DOT projects. We are reimbursing up to $40 million the developer for roadway projects. There's obviously a very hefty private contribution, and so as they begin to pull permits, build master plan roads, we will reimburse them on a pro rata basis for design, hard and soft costs associated with those master plan roads specifically. All of that was initiated in the general development agreement and then followed through in a road participation agreement. So again, the triggering event is actually receiving a building permit. And so knowing that we don't have a building permit yet, we are working on design. GLDC has been working on design, has gone through park and planning for phase 1, which is the infrastructure plan, preliminary plan approval, which they've received, and finalizing the design of the roadways. Following design of the roadways, they'll be able to submit for a building permit and then ultimately receive a building permit. And that will be the triggering event of when we start the reimbursements, and that's reflected in our best guess of what that expenditure schedule looks like. To your question, Mr. Hucker, there have been ongoing conversations throughout. I mean, obviously, this has been a 10-year-long project in counting, and the general development agreement, I believe, was executed in 2016, so quite a bit going on over the last several years. The county and GLDC transacted in the fall. So we have sold the county's Site 2 property, the 100 acres, to GLDC. As part of the general development agreement, before that transaction were to occur, the county had certain obligations, including demolition, extinguishing easements, and other things. And those were all conditions and county obligations precedent to a closing. In GLDC's desire to possess the property and be able to move forward with a comprehensive 280-acre project, they asked to purchase the property and acknowledged, and obviously we needed to amend the agreement to take all of those pre-closing obligations that the county had and turn them into post-closing obligations. And so it was a very transparent, eyes wide open as to what GLDC, what our timing on demolition was. It was underway, it wasn't complete. They're well aware of that. They've been aware of that since the fall when they accepted the property, and all of the other county obligations that have that remain open. So the timing, the schedule, all very apparent, eyes wide open, and culminating with the transaction back in the fall. So,
thank you. I understand the county executive and DGS believe road construction won't be ready for 12 to 18 months, but planning staff thinks it will. They expect a much shorter timeline of 6 to 8 months. That would put road construction in FY20. There are folks who, I appreciate the council president's recommendation that we pass this resolution to restate this council's commitment to the project. I think that would be very helpful. There is a fair amount of concern in the community that the council, the county in general, is sort of backing away from our commitment. There are folks who have asked us to put $5 million on the rec list to clarify that we're still committed. If you think we don't need to do that, why don't we need to do that?
So as it relates to the current expenditure schedule, as Mr. Smith mentioned, this is a private sector-driven construction project, right? So the money here is simply for reimbursement. We, as Gene mentioned, we are able to maneuver as necessary. We have a $40 million full appropriation from council, and we have contractual obligations that talk about how we reimburse and how the process works. And so in the event that they submit for a roadway permit, receive a permit, and start construction next week, we'll start the reimbursements. That's a given. And I think Gene has articulated that in the package and reiterated that today.
And there will be funds available to do that.
That's right.
That's what I want to hear you say.
Yes, that's right.
To reassure the
funds
investors.
are here. You're approving the funds, or the funds are approved today, and you're going to reiterate and renew that. Further, and I'm not familiar with the the estimates that you spoke about, the 12 months versus 18 months. But we're three roadways. Obviously, they're not all going to happen at the same time. They need to be sequenced. The first road proposed is probably going to be the Spine Road, A106 in the master plan. It's a 4-lane divided arterial highway. It's very involved. It's very expensive, obviously, and there's a lot that needs to be completed and then submitted to DPS. DPS's timing on permit review for roadways of that is a matter of months, not a matter of weeks. But again, all triggered by the actual application of that roadway permit. So in the event that the permit were applied for next week, then that would give me a very good indication that we need to adjust this. But thus far, and certainly when the executive submitted his proposed CIP in January, and as we formulated it with our budget office back in the fall, this was our best estimate in terms of timing. Again, all subject to modification and change, and of course, if it does, we'll be back here to talk with council.
So it's true, the county's commitment hasn't wavered, and if there's a need for reimbursement, while none of us have a crystal ball and know exactly when road construction will begin, if there's a need for reimbursement in FY20, the funds will be available.
That's correct.
All right, thank you.
The only thing I would add is that, I do want to be, honest. I mean, I understand why the community has some concerns, but my suggestion of a resolution that the council hopefully will adopt unanimously is for there to be a very clear signal, not only to the community, but any potential investors or companies, et cetera, that commitment has not wavered from the council's perspective. I know that there's been, some history with the new executive regarding this project, but, I believe that at least this council is one that is very committed to making sure that economic development happens in all corners of our county, and therefore, we will be here paying very close attention to that moment in time when there is a trigger to require this type of investment in a different schedule. I think that we are all, hopefully very committed to ensuring that occurs. And so that I think, I feel comfortable with what we're dealing with at this moment and what the recommendation from the committee is with that caveat in place. And some of us have been working on this for such a long time that there is no doubt that we're not going to allow something like this to derail this very important promise to the east part of the county. Okay, I don't see any lights, so I think with that, there is a committee recommendation, and all those in favor of that committee recommendation, please raise your hand. And that is unanimous. Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to move on to item 44, and this is NDA Incubator Programs Economic Development Partnership. I believe Mr. Fletcher is here. And we're going to, we have 44 and 45. They're somewhat related. I think there are some issues that we need to iron out here, but we will go in order of the agenda. And so, Council Member
I was the chair.
Reamer, as the chair, you can let us know a little bit what we're dealing with, and Mr. Smith, you will straighten us out as we navigate this, because there are a number of components, including the fact that Gio also had some conversations, but I think that will be on mostly item 45. All right, so
Okay.
let's start with 44.
Exactly.
Reamer.
Once we do 45, we'll turn to 45. And
Once we do
you'll-
44, we'll do-
Exactly. I mean,
44.
when we, right.
Then we'll go to 45.
Although what I meant to say was when we get to 45, you'll take the chair as that's Gio.
We'll do it. Let's do it.
Make it happen. Okay, Gene, you can actually do a good job here. You want to go ahead and get us started?
Actually, I'm not.
Zing!
Sure. So the executive is, I'll review the committee's recommendation real quick, and then there are a couple housekeeping items just that I want to highlight following that. So the committee reviewed the executive's recommendation on May 3rd. They agreed with most of it, but the areas that they didn't agree was with the recommended transfer for the Regional Business Services Hub. The committee recommended the $200,000 not be transferred for that purpose to the Community Engagement Cluster. I'll also note that Mr. Friedson opposed that because he was looking to see more of it not transferred, not opposed to the transfer altogether.
So why don't we pause on, why don't we start with this one? This was leaving the funding in the incubator NDA.
That's what the committee recommended, yes.
Correct. I'm just trying to restate here. So this was the incubator NDA where previously we were funding biohealth innovation. This was a very substantial biotech strategy that the county built. BHI now is self-funding. But Mr. Friedson was concerned that we reserve all funding in this account for additional incubator programs. And while I agree with that we should be spending that much and more as well on incubator programs, the executive branch is leading a study this year, and they'll come back to us later this year with recommendations on an incubator program. And so we were sort of split three ways in some respect, but the majority of the committee did agree that $200,000 of this NDA should remain in the NDA so that we could do something this year around biotech and incubation and innovation. And I think there's actually a lot of possibilities. I've had great conversations. I'll flag this for Councilmember Rice with USG about how they could get more into the incubator environment and the innovation environment. There could be other approaches, but I'm very concerned that we not have any substantial biotech incubation innovation strategy, and I can't imagine any scenario where the executive branch is not going to have, would not recommend that we also do things on biotech incubation and innovation. Having heard no real details about what the incubation strategy will be that they will develop, we don't know. But the committee recommendation here was to leave $200,000 in the NDA so that there is the opportunity this year, if ideas come forward on what is really one of our most critical economic sectors, to move quickly and to take action. So as a result, you'll see this noted in the reconciliation list. It doesn't require funding. It's just noted that $200,000 is retained in this particular account. So that's the first thing I wanted to just pause there, since that was a topic.
Okay, we do have some lights, so should we go count? No, okay, Councilmember. All right, Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Council President, and thank you to Mr. Reamer for clarifying that. I was the other vote in support of the transfer. I actually wanted, just for my colleagues, so what that means, the other side of the coin, part of the shift, and we had a lot of discussion about shifts and decreases too in the committee about using the proper language here, but part of the shift of the funding was $429,583 that was going to go to support the full-scale regional business services hub. And so the $200,000, what the committee, majority of the committee took the action to say $200,000 should remain in the biohealth incubator innovation space, and then the $229,583 could be shifted, as the executive requested, to these hubs. And I just think for the full part of the discussion, it would be great for Mr. Fletcher, to talk about that. I don't know if you have any additional ideas of what that's going to be. I know I see our regional service folks here. I think many of us in theory want to see the regional centers be more of a hub and involved, as many of them already are. I was just talking to one about a job fair this weekend and at Adventist, and so I know there's a desire to buttress that, but I think I expressed, and I think my colleagues agreed, we also want to see a plan for how that money is going to be spent and what that means. And it's a little light right now, but do you want to talk about that at all?
Sure, and good morning, Madam President and council members. The plan that we submitted, from the executive office was one that I think was done very well, given the limited time constraints that the new administration had once they came in the door. I think we all, the executive and the CAO, recognize that the RSCs and the directors have had their resources reduced in a way that has left them kind of strapped, so to speak. And this was an effort to address that and make sure that we were providing them some resources. In addition to the Business Solutions Group that will be already venturing out into the field by being located there now, this 429 was for 3 specific FTEs. The reduction of leaving $200,000 in the account now forces us to come up with an alternative plan because we cannot do that. And so the resources that we were going to put there, we can no longer put there. Just having received this information and this decision, we have yet to come up with what we believe a new strategy will be, but we will have to work around that if council so chooses to not allocate these specific resources for that purpose. Going
So
back
no current
to
plan for the 229.
correct, because that's what
You'll
we
modify though. You're still going
Correct.
to use it for those purposes, right? You're not saying.
I'm saying that with the 229, we will still use that money towards that plan, but it cannot be the same specific
Sure,
plan that we had because we're $200,000 short. And to address Councilmember Reamer's comments as well, you know, we, as I said in our other smaller meeting, you know, the county will not neglect, you know, the biohealth technology, as we know that it is, you know, a large sector of priority here in Montgomery County and the assets that it provides. So the plan that we have for the resource business hubs is part of the small business strategy overall for the county, which we are still reviewing, and the council will see that shortly, in my opinion, once we get it approved. But that is just the beginning of how we plan on communicating the strategies going forward. This transfer right here was one that was very easy, so to speak, because they need resources. We put our current small business navigator and our other small business resources to them in the field. It does not relieve all of the pressure and pain points, but it's a start. And this was a second phase of that process to allow for 2 new FTEs and 1 existing FTE to also shift towards that same process. So as we launched yesterday, the resource hub out in Up County, and happy Small Business Week to everyone, by the way. We began the process, and you know, I think it's been well received, and I think that what we will see is that the workshops and training and the programs and the technical assistance that's being offered will be improved. So now we just have to figure out now what does that look like now based on this decision.
And obviously keep us posted because you know the haircut could have been more. I think I was able to get you 50,000 extra.
And thank you,
just
sir.
to put that on the record.
Yes.
I think
Absolutely.
Councilman Reamer had a different proposal. So
They did.
spend it wisely and keep us posted. And I think it's something that is important, but we need to have some meat on the bones there. So,
Absolutely, yes, sir.
Thank you.
Just wanted to share that, you know, this particular effort is one that has been in conversations for quite a while. It really started with the Economic Development Corporation, the creation of that entity, and how it did not focus specifically on small businesses. You know, I approached them, and they did create 1 position, which Mr. Parra has now. But there had been constant feedback from our small business community of not having a real understanding of how to access those services. So this effort is one that we have been in discussions for a very long time. And so I just want to associate myself with my colleagues in terms of really expecting a thorough proposal, you know, sooner than later, because we've already pretty much, I think, crafted this proposal in all of those conversations that we had in the past in collaboration with the regional services directors who have actually been doing this already, you know, without any resources. So it should not be that difficult, I think, for us to have a plan that is thorough and that captures all of the feedback from the regional services directors, given what's happening on the ground. And you know, and I just offer that as just constructive feedback that this is not one of those that should require a lot of time to develop. And also just want to cue for my colleagues that on the next item, we will be discussing something related to this. So, you know, stay tuned. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you, Mr. Fletcher, and thank you to my colleagues on the Fed committee. I've had the benefit of actually being on both sides of this conversation, just being the one council member who happens to serve on both the Fed and the GO committees. And I think it's given me an opportunity to really understand the convoluted way that this proposal has been put forward. And I think that the challenge, one of the main challenges I mentioned before, we're dealing with a baby that was born in an awkward way. A normal situation that you would do is you would say we want more positions, more emphasis at the regional services centers that have been chronically understaffed coming out of the recession, haven't restored the positions that we need. We see them as a tremendous opportunity to provide small business support, and so we're going to fund them. And there are plenty of areas in the county executive's budget where he added money to things that he thought were important. And I could see that. I think here we're talking about something different. We shifted money out of a program that was not continued for reasons that I think are reasonable, but a choice was made. And so the idea was this kind of looks like free money that was intended for biohealth programs that's in the incubator NDA. And my point is, it's not free money. That money is there for a very specific purpose to do very specific things. And I think this is another example, as we talked about earlier, of being somewhat disingenuous with saying you're focusing on certain things from the county executive and then not funding them and actually cutting funding from them. And in this case, with incubators, the county executive has mentioned time and time again how important the incubator program is to have a robust program, and he cut out most of the funding in his proposal and only left what was remaining without any level of intentionality of how much this process was going to cost. And I sympathize for you sitting here and having to argue for it and defend it, because I understand the difficult situation that you're in, but that is my concern. It's not a decision of whether or not the idea of the regional business hub is a good idea. It's not the question of whether or not that has even been fully fleshed out, which I don't believe it has. To Councilmember Jawando's point, we'd like to see, he says light on details. I think it's almost non-existent on details in terms of a holistic strategy of what this will entail and how we ramp it up fully. But the bigger issue for me is the idea that this money was in the budget for a specific purpose. It's in an NDA for a reason, so that it can't be moved easily, so that it will specifically be used for very specific purposes. And now we're moving it out. So I voted against that. My preference was to keep it in and to force the priority to be fulfilled, which is we're going to have a robust incubator strategy and incubator plan. And to date, we don't know how much the consultant is going to cost, what the scope of service is going to be, how long it's going to take, and when we're going to want this to go. And I think it's related to the climate emergency conversation we had before. The other emergency that we have is a fiscal and economic emergency, which is the fact that we have an economy that isn't growing. We have needs in the community that are, and our capacity to meet those needs within the resources that we have is not there. And unless we grow a private sector economy in a real significant and a real serious way, we are headed down a place where we'll not be able to fund anything else in the budget. And so that really is the basis for my concerns. I respect the fact of where the committee went. I have an honest and I think reasonable disagreement with it. I just wanted to kind of share my viewpoint. My concern is not related to the regional services hub plan, even though I think that we need some actual details before we move forward and start funding positions, but it's with the fact that we say that this is a priority and now we're gutting the budget for it. And the secondary aspect of that is it's another example of funding ongoing expenses with one-time savings. We're going to come back next year, and I hope that there is going to be a robust incubator program, and that robust incubator program is going to cost money, probably serious money. And now we've moved all the money out from this part of the budget, and so we are going to have to grow more and more FTEs in order to keep up. And I think this is, in an honest budgeting standpoint, a somewhat disingenuous way to say that we're shrinking the size of government, we're not, increasing it, we're being, leaner, but we're not being leaner. We're just moving money around this time, knowing when we do it that we're going to have to spend more money down the road, and that, significantly concerns me. I think that there was a better way to do this. And I'll close with saying that I do sympathize with what you said, Mr. Fletcher, that you think you did as best as you could, given the limited time frame that you had, I will make a value judgment on how much time it would take to come up with a fully fleshed out proposal. But I think it speaks to the fact that we are, rushing into things, and without having fully baked proposals, we are being asked to fund priorities, this being an example. The other one being that needing to add things on the rec list that, somehow, some way, despite the fact that they are top priorities of the administration, were left off and left out of the budget. And I just, from a process standpoint, this isn't a direct criticism of you. It's really a criticism of the administration en masse and of the process itself. This is just not a thoughtful way to come up with a sustainable budget that reflects our long-term shared priorities.
Okay, I just have a quick question regarding the Wheaton TAP that has been reduced to 208,000. What was that reduction amount?
Good morning. Lori Boyer, Economic Development Manager in the Department of Finance. That simply reflects when that Wheaton program was originally set up, there were multiple service providers who were providing the on-the-ground one-on-one business counseling services to the businesses affected by the project in Wheaton. And currently, there is only one service provider, LEDC, who is still providing those services. So it's just an actual reflection of the cost to the county for services that are being provided to the businesses down there.
Okay, so what was the reduction from the original amount?
I don't have that right in front of me. There had been funding for...
360,000.
Thank you.
Sorry, what was that?
The original amount in fiscal 19 was 360,000.
So now it's 208?
Correct.
So it's about, what, 100,000 something dollars or something of that. So, I mean, I guess that is a concern for me because I have not heard that things are just going so great that, the businesses have received such amazing technical assistance that would warrant reducing the amount. I've heard the opposite, and it's been a struggle. It has been a challenge trying to make sure that the businesses are receiving the appropriate technical assistance. It's a very complex issue because you have language issues, you have cultural issues. LEDC has been doing an amazing job, but I'm just a little bit puzzled as to why we would reduce it to that amount. And I saw here that LEDC had not asked for an increase, but I know that they have been, spread pretty thin, trying to really deal with every stage of the process of revitalization.
I mean, that was just from an actual perspective that because we only had the one vendor who was providing those services, both in FY18 and currently in FY19, then that was the only funding need that we had identified. We had not heard from any businesses who are saying that they're not getting enough support services. We do think LEDC is doing a tremendous job down there, and originally the total 360-some thousand had been carved up between LEDC and two other service providers, and from a geographic perspective, LEDC was responsible for what we've referred to as the center of the donut, and the other providers were providing services to those on the outside of the donut who were not as affected directly by the construction project that's going on down there.
I'm sorry, Ms. Montero, can you please join us? Because, so I do know that the outside of the donut folks, who, I know I'm really hungry, I'm having visions of powdered donuts. There is a Dunkin' Donuts. Jelly, no, I don't like jelly donuts. So I know that we had the state involved in providing some of those services, and I think, was it the Hispanic Chamber that had a small grant or something to that effect, Ms. Montero?
That's correct. The SBDC was providing services to the outside the donut businesses, and the Hispanic Chamber was providing a small amount of assistance as well.
And what had been shared with me, actually, was that many businesses were hoping that because LEDC had such a robust operation, that the businesses outside the donut would get support from LEDC. So did LEDC share with you or anybody, is there any documentation that they were not interested in providing services to those businesses?
No, Council President, I don't have any information from LEDC on that. I do know that as part of their portfolio in general and a lot of the other services they provide, they do work with some of the businesses outside the triangle, but of course not to the same extent. So the services they're providing in the triangle are much more intensive and in-depth and one-on-one, but they are providing, training and workshops to the businesses outside of the triangle as well. I'm not sure also whether in FY18 anyway, we didn't have a county employee working on there, and now we do. Justin Stone, as you know, is there working on the ground with LADC. That was not, I think he's been on about a year.
Correct. Yep.
So he's an additional support at this point that's coming from other funding.
Okay, so, unfortunately, I did not have enough time, given that this has been, a busy budget cycle, to dig deeper into this, but I do want to register my concern and my frustration because we have not heard that the support has been sufficient. County Executive Elrich knows this because he had attended many of the meetings with the business community and heard very clearly that there were a lot of gaps that still existed. And so this would have been an opportunity for us to actually strengthen LADC's capacity to provide that same level of high quality support that they did inside the donut to the other providers. I will not make a motion because we are going to be talking about some other possibilities on the next item to strengthen actually the capacity of the Regional Services Center to provide this kind of support. So I think at the end of the day, we might be able to, figure that out. But I do want to express my absolute, frustration that this was not discussed previously. And it seems a bit disingenuous to say that, in an area where we have mostly minority immigrant-owned businesses who have been troopers in terms of collaborating with us on a county-initiated revitalization program, that we would kind of dismiss it and say, well, you know what, they just don't really need that more, technical assistance. Does not make any sense at all to me. So,
Can I just clarify that so LADC, inside the donut is also the designated area where businesses qualify for the financial small business assistance program?
I was the author of the Small Business Assistance Program. I was the one who drafted the legislation after working so closely with businesses for over a year, and I'm so very familiar with all of this. Again, I can say to you that the businesses around, outside of that area have been as impacted as those, within. And so the need of these small businesses is real, especially when you look at the profile of who the business owners are. And again, it just speaks to this sort of tone-deaf situation that's happening when we're talking about equity and economic development, and we support our small businesses. And here we have an opportunity when we have ground zero to really be a model that shows that with this particular program that, I authored it and the council supported it. We put it forth, we fought for funding, we fought for technical assistance that was culturally appropriate and proficient. We have been, in constant communication to say that, hey, you're good, we can take this money away, just does not seem, correct. And then it fuels the sentiment that exists in that area that the county government seems to be tone deaf. That's my problem. So I just want to register that publicly, and I appreciate your support, your willingness to explain further. But with all due respect, again, I have been intimately involved with this, and I can tell you right now, this was not a really good move. But we'll see what we can do with the next item. All right. Anything else? What is it that we need to do? Are we done? Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you. That's an important conversation about Wheaton, and we'll follow up on that. Wanted to just focus for a minute on two items that we have found somewhat perplexing, and I think we might be worthwhile just talking about again. This is the transfer of the kitchen incubator into the executive office, as well as the transfer of funding for the biomanufacturing industry cluster into the executive office. So I wanted to just ask, first of all, who are the economic development staffers? I note that Lori Boyer, you're at the finance department. You're an economic development manager. And Mr. Fletcher, you're the ACAO. We no longer have a economic development department. We created a business solutions group, but now this budget contemplates transferring that group into the community engagement cluster. Who else is an economic development staffer in the executive branch?
Tina Benjamin.
Tina Benjamin.
She's a former economic.
We know her
development-
well. She's a
employee.
VIP for us.
All right.
And
Peter.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but she's a special assistant, I believe, right, or something like that. She's
a special projects manager.
Special projects
right.
manager.
Special assistants are on the executive side. We have special project manager.
Okay, so she's a special project manager. She works with you.
Correct. Peter Fosselman, he
Fosselman.
also focuses on economic development. And I know there's some more people in finance who are economic development focused, but as far as the executive office, I believe.
What I'm getting at is I'm a little unclear. Why don't we transfer the biomanufacturing industry cluster to Lori at finance? Actually, this one, it sounds like you've already figured out precisely what's going to happen, and it's a lease arrangement.
This one was what I tried to reference earlier was the sort of easy fix, because we were putting resources that were already doing those duties just closer to actually the people. The rest of it, as we have learned, the different people that you reference, Tina that I referenced, these valuable resources are still hanging out there for economic development within the county and, more importantly, the executive's office. As we move forward, and what we are trying to do is to create a more comprehensive, holistic economic development strategy. Part of that is the small business plan that we talked about earlier. But in order to know where we truly want to go, the overarching economic development strategy is very important, and we are working on that. And I believe that we have 1 or 2 meetings scheduled with council to have some discussions about where we're at and where we're going. What I would say is we would love to have all the answers and everything all nice and wrapped up in a pretty little bow, and it would have been a perfect budget season, but we just don't have that yet.
Sorry, I'm really just asking a very logistical question. I don't mean to be getting into bigger issues around this specific question. Why wouldn't we transfer the biomanufacturing industry cluster responsibility to Lori, who's an economic development manager at finance?
So I can talk to that one specifically for a minute. So that is actually just a local county match to a state grant that the universities at Shady Grove is getting for their Nimble project at the BBR building there.
It's a check writing responsibility at this point.
Normally, that would have been something funded through the EDF fund, like we do other county matches for state Department of Commerce MEDAF grants. Because IBBR and the University of Maryland is actually affiliated with a state agency, county law prohibits us from providing an EDF grant fund to them because they're considered a state agency. So normally that would have come out of the EDF fund as a match. Because this is we could not do that from the EDF fund. We just recommended that the county that Tina Benjamin and the county executive's office oversee that match for the next 5 years, because it wasn't coming directly out of the economic development fund. I mean, we can certainly do that, but it's the funding match comes out of the incubator NDA.
Well, it doesn't anymore, because it's being transferred out of the incubator NDA, and it's being transferred into the county executive's office's budget, which isn't necessarily inherently problematic. I'm not saying that there's something flawed in that, but it's confusing. When you are an economic development manager, why wouldn't we just transfer it over to the finance department, or even leave it in the NDA for that matter? What's the value of transferring it out of the NDA? Gene, can you speak to the question of the NDA?
Sure. I mean, the incubator NDA is a pot of money that's set aside for specific purposes, which is why we outline how the executive plans to appropriate money or use the appropriation in any given year. In regards to your question, had it stayed in the incubator NDA, I would presume that finance would have administered the funds, because that would have been the source of funding.
I don't know if it's a distinction without a difference, because there's something to transferring money into the county executive's office budget. I'm not implying anything, wrong with that, but there is something to that. And meanwhile, all this is an administrative function of where are we spending the money that we've already decided And this is a great use. I really do want to say I'm super enthusiastic about this. It's awesome. But it seems like we could just leave it in the NDA and it would not require us to transfer it to the county executive. Second issue I wanted to highlight is the kitchen. I'm not going to use the word incubator here. I agree with Councilmember Friedson. That's not the right word for this initiative. If someone were to propose that we create an incubator for restaurants, I would say no. We don't need to do that. The private sector is capable of generating its own restaurants, and restaurants is not a growth industry that we should be spending money on. What is interesting about this proposal is that it is workforce development, that they're talking about bringing county residents who are maybe harder to employ, have had more challenging careers, paths, don't have career paths, and try to bring them into the restaurant industry. And that might be, beneficial. We'll see how this thing shapes up. But it's really workforce development. And it should be in the workforce development conversation. And whenever we, as a council, and that is a joint committee topic, that's where it should be. It should be in the joint, it should be talked about in the context of workforce development. And I will say, again, I said this before, when I met with the entrepreneurs who were putting this vision together, they said they thought that the annual subsidy for the workforce development component might be $750,000. Right? That is like 3/4 of what we spend on WorkSource Montgomery itself, our workforce development organization. Maybe you can get that number down, but it's got to come down. I mean, I don't think we are going to want to add $750,000 a year for hospitality, entry-level employment. But I'm not prejudging what council members might want to do, but there is a big thing here that hasn't really been worked out as to what is this initiative, how much money is good, so on and so forth. I know this is the seed funding, and so I support the seed funding, but I really just want to say this should be in the workforce development bucket going forward. And so, and this gets to my same conversation about the biomanufacturing industry cluster. I think we should leave the biomanufacturing industry cluster in the NDA so that when we talk about this issue, we're talking about it at the economic development conversation about bio and health and all those other initiatives, rather than splintering it into a different conversation. And then secondly, the kitchen, workforce development program, hospitality workforce development program should be, the restaurant workforce should be in the workforce development bucket so that we're talking about it in that context. Otherwise, we're going to have to ask for the GO committee to meet to make a recommendation to the joint committee. It's just going to get a little bit confusing. So those are I guess I'm going to make that, I don't think I'll make them as joint motions, a joint motion, so I'll make them separately. So the first one would be to leave the biomanufacturing industry cluster funding in the incubator NDA. And I believe Mr. Friedson, you said you seconded that. Is there the council president will administer the, yeah.
Is there any objection to that? I don't hear any objection.
Okay, thank you so much. And then for the kitchen incubator, I don't necessarily object to transferring it to, for the workforce, transferring it to the county executive's office unless someone can think of a better place for it to be. Gene, is there a place where it would more naturally be as a workforce development program?
Not at this time.
Okay, so then we would just say, again, maybe council members have other comments here, but we would just say this should be taken up in the course of our conversations about workforce development.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on that. I mean, this particular proposal was one that came to me in late fall. I know that La Comunidad had met with everybody. I was very excited about it because what I saw was a vision for a particular proposal that would encompass a lot of different elements that we had discussed previously. It had the opportunity of providing, yes, workforce development for folks who were interested in the culinary arts. It provided incubation for small restaurants. I always mention the example of Arepa Zone in DC that first had a food truck and then won a contest and got a little stall type thing at Union Market, and then was able to leverage some funding to open a little restaurant on 14th Street. And so we don't have anything like that here in the county, but yet we have a lot of people, especially in the immigrant communities, communities of color, who would really benefit from something like this. So this has the potential of incubating that kind of, small restaurant, even food truck type of situation. And in addition, it has the potential of helping to develop the culinary technical skills, since we have lost some of our chef, culinary arts academies here in the region. And so it kind of checks all those boxes. And it also checks the box of having some kind of really cool, albeit a smaller scale, type of Union Market experience. I remember when we took up the Randolph Hills master plan, that we did retain some of the light industrial type of zoning for that shopping center, thinking that, hey, what if there is an opportunity for something like this in the future? So I don't see this as just workforce development. I see this as a major combination that has that cool element that we keep talking about, how our, young people, I know my daughters go to Union Market all the time, so potentially can have that. It has the opportunity to help those folks that want to venture into this type of field, and it has the opportunity of incubating small restaurants that hopefully can be successful, because a lot of these people who want to venture into this don't have access to capital or technical assistance like some bigger restaurants do. So as far as I'm concerned, this should be kind of a joint thing. I don't think it's one or the other. If it's implemented, correctly. So I support the $40,000, and I see this as a broader vision. And therefore, I don't know where it should live, but as long as it gets executed and implemented, I'm good. I think it's a really awesome, opportunity for us, and other areas have done things that are very similar. Councilmember Rice.
So thank you very much, Madam President. And so I'm a little bit concerned, because it seems that a lot of people have heard a lot about this, and as the chair of the Education and Culture Committee, and as a person who has experience in working in this space, it's the first I'm hearing of this. Not only that, but I serve on the Universities of Shady Grove Board of Advisors, where we house our Campus Kitchens project, one that's partnered with Marriott, that I used to work for 6 years, that has the experience in this space and has been constantly trying to address some of the issues that the council president just spoke of. So I'm not sure what this plan is, and so I've heard from two different people on the dais two different descriptions of what this is. So can somebody tell me what this is?
So the $40,000 is for us to initiate a food hall type study. And yes, there's been people have called it.
Can you describe what you mean by a food hall? It means very different things depending on where you are. So could you give more detail as to what you mean by a food hall?
Well, from my understanding, the space that they're looking to establish is one that would allow a food industry to actually come to Montgomery County and set up a location that would then have a workforce development piece to it, as well as an actual food hall where people could actually come to visit. If you would like us to get you more details, which I'm not 100% sure that we have provided that to the council, we'd be more than happy to provide that to your council.
So, and so this is the part that troubles me most, in that we're already talking about providing funding for something where you don't even have anything that you could show me that says this is what we're doing.
I think
right?
Circle 3 has the description, and I'm sorry to hear that this group did not meet with you, but the first thing I said to them when they came to meet with me was that they needed to meet with all council members. I know Councilmember Friedson, you said that they had met with you, but I think Circle 3 has the description of it.
Yeah, that was provided by the executive staff who would be managing this seed/feasibility stage.
So when I'm looking at this, it's saying that the structure for delivery of services, market analysis for an actual place, a food hall market, culinary job training program components. So that's something directly that both Montgomery College and USG provide currently in partnership with Marriott Corporation. And so are you looking to compete with what we have that's going on in our educational space?
I don't think we're looking to compete with our partners. I think what we're looking to do is to see the feasibility and conduct a study to see what works best in this county.
Have you had conversations with either Montgomery College or universities at Shady Grove?
I am not aware of who has had any conversations with them to this point.
I can answer that question for you. The answer is no. When I talked to Mike Knapp, who is the chair of our Board of Advisors, as well as Stu Edelstein, who leads universities at Shady Grove, as well as our Board of Trustees within Montgomery College, they have no idea and express continued angst over having something like this being floated without having conversations with the key entities that are providing this service right now. So that's incredibly concerning. What I would like to ask, Madam President, is that I do agree with you that certainly something like this is interesting, but until we've had an opportunity to talk with the players that are already in the space that are doing it, I'm not objecting to. And the thing that you mentioned that I think is incredibly powerful is about providing assistance and training for people who may have food trucks, things of that nature, or want to get into that space and then eventually start restaurants. That's very different from some of the other things that are being mentioned here as a part of this overall goal. Because, again, one of our leading partners here in the county who does this work, being Marriott Corporation and being an employee of them, as well as Airmark and Guest Services, who all do this kind of work, it's just very interesting that we're trying to then do something in the government space that private sector already is doing. And so that's just something where I think we want to be very careful about how we go about this approach. But what you mentioned, Madam President, is something that's not happening in the space right now when it comes to food trucks and other kinds of things, when it comes to the incubation of restaurateurs being developed. That's a totally separate piece that I think warrants. And so I think us flushing out the information to get more of an idea of what identity this is going to take on is incredibly important for us before we move forward with the shifting of the funds. So that's kind of my thoughts at this point.
Thank you. And, you know, it's funny to find myself having to explain to my colleagues a proposal that's coming from the executive side. But in defense of the actual proposal, I will say that, you know, again, when the group came to meet with me, they expressed their strong desire to partner with Montgomery College, USG, industry, because this is, first of all, it's not a large-scale kind of effort, but it would have, and they are looking at places like Wheaton, for example, it would have a very important presence in areas like these because they would be nestled in areas where you do have a lot of low-income people or, you know, service-oriented workers that do need this kind of second-level technical assistance, workforce development, skill set development, but also the entrepreneurial part of it, which would not be in competition with any of the big corporations. These are very small, possibly restaurants, but those industries have expressed the desire to have better trained workers as well. So it does, you know, have that component as well. They themselves would not have the capacity to do everything, so this would be in partnership. And my understanding is that this seed money is to actually explore and solidify that entire, you know, proposal. But it seems to fit very well in many of the areas of our county that have already that kind of energy, and Wheaton being one of them. So that would be my pitch, generally speaking. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you for that, Council President. And just to reiterate, I want to thank you again. I thanked you during a previous conversation about this, but you did suggest to me directly and to the proposer to meet with them, and I think it is a terrific idea. I just want to clarify a few points from my perspective, because I really share the main point of what you just said, which is it shouldn't be your responsibility to shop the fifth floor for support for the county executive's proposals. And I think that that is part of the challenge here. And I don't think that even though I support this funding for this program and think it could be terrific, I don't think that the administration has done the proposer any favors by not being as communicative and fleshing out this as much as could have been done. I share the concern and frustration from Councilmember Rice. My understanding is I think the communication with our existing programs could be enhanced, and the communication needs to happen at the highest levels, and I don't believe that has happened, and I think that has been part of the problem. But I believe Susan Callahan is intimately involved in the program, and she is one of the outstanding people who at Universities of Shady Grove runs the hospitality, or helps to run the hospitality program as a professor there, and as part of what is the secret sauce to USG, as you know, Councilmember Rice, which is the fact that what few realize is that the University of Maryland Eastern Shore has one of the best hospitality programs on the East Coast. And we now have access to that program in Montgomery County, and I think the goal of this program would be to take advantage of something like that. But when we don't have the levels of communication at the highest levels that are required, I think we get breakdowns and we get concerns and frustrations. But I did want to clarify that. I think you're right about the lack of communication, but I don't think that it should. I don't think it's a competition. I think it's a complementary aspect of it. To Councilmember Reamer's point, I think the issue here, it's similar to other conversations that we've had today. The primary purpose of this I see as community development. This would be a great place and a great space and an awesome opportunity for a community to come together and to create placemaking and all the things that we talk about and struggle to be able to figure out, well, what does that look like and what does that mean and how do we do it? And bringing together a reflection of the number of cultures that we have in Montgomery County in a place where they share the most cultural experience I believe you can, which is to break bread or whatever type of food you break. But that is, to me, the heart of culture. And I think this would really reflect that. But I think it's important to note my understanding of this proposal, to Councilmember Reamer's point, the front of the house and the back of the house. The front of the house is the food hall. The back of the house is the workforce development program. The front of the house is envisioned to be self-sustaining based on the proposers and my conversations with them. That's not where they really need the community support. They have the right folks who know how to do that. They might need some help getting off the ground, and maybe that's part of what this is going to look at. But the government involvement that they envision needing and the nonprofit support and foundational local foundation support that they need to subsidize is the back of the house, is the workforce development, the community development, all the other aspects of it that aren't the front part of the house. And so, while part of this could be an incubator for businesses, that's not the role that is envisioned by the proposers, as has been shared with me and I think some of my colleagues, for what our role in this project would be. And so I just wanted to clarify that it's not that we don't see the value, or I don't personally see the value of incubating restaurants from concepts to actual booths, to actual stalls in a food hall, to an actual physical sit down or walk up restaurant. It's just that is not the role that has been shared with me, which is envisioned by the proposers in terms of our long-term partnership if this were to come to fruition. And so that's why I see this as primarily a workforce development, which I think there's tremendous value in, because that's the role that we'd be investing in long term. And so I just wanted to clarify my points on that and some of the points that Councilmember Reamer made. My view is this is a good project. I like it. I think that we should move forward with it. I think there's broad support, it seems, on the council. I do have a concern, though, with, as has been raised with the biohealth, of moving it into the county executive's office, not because I don't want the senior level folks who work on the second floor in the county executive's office to have direct control over it. I think they ought to, and I think they need to in order for this to be successful. But the challenge we have, the way that we budget, and I know that there are significant interests from the administration to change the way we budget, and I'm open to hearing what that would look like moving forward. But as of right now, the way our budget works, we start next year's budget with this year's budget. And this 40,000 and change expenditure will be seen as a cut if we don't continue it next year to the county executive's office. If this needs to move somewhere else, and kind of, to me, that is what is the concern here. This is not a function of the county executive's office. It's really a function of workforce development or community development or incubating, if that's how you view it as the primary function of it. So my view would be move it into finance if you want, but I think we should just leave it in the incubator for the time being, since we don't know what this is going to be. Leave it in the NDA, see how it works out. It's not a significant amount of money right now, but I believe it will need to be a significant amount of money. If this is going to work, we're going to need to make a real serious investment, partnering with USG and Montgomery College, partnering with the private sector like Marriott and Aramark and Host and Choice and others, to make this really happen, to make this take hold. I think we can have that conversation for next year's budget. I'm hopeful that if there is a serious proposal, that we get it really fleshed out in a serious way before we consider it, and don't have to handle it on the fly with the council president having to really make the case for it. So I would move to keep it in the NDA. And with that said, with that second, and that's all I have. Keep it in the NDA. Look forward to supporting this project, and I'm hopeful that communication can improve with us and with our partners at USG and Montgomery College and in the private sector, and that you can come forward as this plan progresses, because I think, as you hear, a lot of us are really excited about this, and I think there are some open questions about where this is going to go, and I know that is the idea of where this money is supposed to be invested in, to figure out what the location would look like, how it would work, and how we move forward for a really robust plan that serves the community, serves the workforce, and serves our business partners.
Okay, so I don't want to belabor this point any further, because this is $40,000 in order to look into the feasibility. This is not a major investment. The only thing I will, because I can't help but clarify or communicate, is that, I look at communities, for example, like Wheaton, as major communities that have major potential and assets. So I am not going to reduce and minimize this particular proposal as just, community development that highlights ethnic restaurants. This does have a potential of really, furthering a lot of these entrepreneurs that maybe just need that extra push. It is kind of like an opportunity for all of that to occur. It is not some, really cool little thing to have. And I just take issue with that, because sometimes when we talk about other areas of the county, we immediately say things like major economic development hubs. Words matter. And so for the residents of those areas and for those amazing entrepreneurs that are right now trying to make it, for example, in the Wheaton area, they want to make sure that we also see their potential as relevant, and that they also deserve to have opportunities like these. But we should not just try to minimize these kinds of opportunities as community development or, cool, ethnic hubs. My vision is that we take advantage of these innovative approaches to really boost and really make sure that these businesses move forward. So hopefully that's what the executive is trying to do, because I will not support going forward anything that has that kind of connotation, because that is what we have done time and time again in some of these areas of the county. I think this is an opportunity to see how we can best boost and best, leverage all of these elements to give this community an opportunity and these entrepreneurs to really access major opportunities for economic development. And I got to tell you, this is not slated to be a Union Market, mind you, because I know that's a very large place. But I don't think anybody can claim the Union Market is not a major economic development presence hub in DC. I mean, try to go there on a nice day and find a spot to sit. We don't have anything like that in Montgomery County, so maybe this is just a seed that begins that process, and maybe, we end up doing something like that. I really just want to mention that, because I know these folks really have high expectations from us. Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much, Council President, and I agree with you. First of all, we're talking about $41,000. I mean, we've spent a lot of time on this, and I really believe this is a possibility for great things to happen in Montgomery County. We all should remember that Marriott Corporation started out as A&W Root Beer. I mean, they had a little root beer stand and became one of the most major players in the world for a business, and it actually started in Washington. And so, I mean, these things have great possibilities. Not every restaurant is going to become A&W Root Beer, and not every restaurant is going to become Marriott. But if we have, when you look around Montgomery County and you see the empty storefronts that we have, and if we can get additional restaurant entrepreneurs to open up a new restaurant, and candidly, they're in competition many times each other, but many times they want to open up next door because if one is busy, then they know that somebody's going to say, I'm not going to wait a half an hour, I'll go next door, and I know the food is good there too, and I'll try them out. So, well, this is a great possibility. This whole thing that we're discussing is $41,000 for a contract to determine the feasibility. And I can tell you that it is well worth it, and if we can get other restaurants to come to these shopping areas that are having vacant storefronts, many times they fill in because they become the foot traffic for those shopping areas. I think this makes a lot of sense. I think we should do it, and candidly, we should probably do it much quicker than we are.
Okay, Councilmember Jawanda.
Thank you, Council President, and concur. Actually, Susan Callahan is one of the chief partners in this project. It's like her idea. I think she would classify it as that. And one of her other partners is an investor in a great craft restaurant, Full On, which I eat at often, leaving here, a sandwich restaurant at the corner of Norbeck in Georgia, and Gene's nodding. And so I think there's actually not enough of those types of restaurants in the county, and where that aren't chains that have unique business models. So I think for a number of reasons, the training component, the need for new non-chain restaurants, what Councilmember Katz had discussed, and so it does, and the fact that they are partnering, their chief chef is her idea, and I think it's just got the community connection. I mean, they probably could have, it's obvious they could have done a better job, and the executive's office could have done a better job of socializing this, because, I mean, it literally has all the components of the people involved to be successful. And I don't disagree with the proposed moving. The one thing that did trouble me about the money is that moving it to the executive's office was this last line. Once the funding is transferred, it's going to be allocated for future years in the executive's office and could be used for other purposes. And I don't think, that's why I suggested. So I don't know if you want to speak to that. I mean, we all want this to happen, but we don't want to see it as a backdoor to just increase the executive's budget, which is what this says. So do you all have a comment on that? Anyone from the executive side?
I'm not aware of that language, but I asked, was it standard language, just to give us the flexibility to get done what we need done. But in this situation that we're addressing currently and foremost, I can tell you that that money will be used for that purpose, if that's a concern.
And what about future years? Is that something that was in the staff?
Yeah, that was just a staff comment noting. I mean, and Mr. Friedson noted this, as if the money is shifted from the incubator NDA to the county office of the county executive in fiscal 20 as proposed, when the base budget for fiscal 21 starts, that money will be in the county executive's office. And staff just wanted to note that if council members or the Fed committee at that time really was concerned where the money was going, that they should take note.
And just to back to the executive, if we leave it in the NDA, you'll still use it for these purposes.
Correct.
You have to,
That
but
would be the intent, yes,
yes.
And we would just administer the funding of that through the incubator NDA rather than through the county executive
So
office.
I think that's fine, and I think we're all saying similar things. Thank you.
Okay, we do have a number of lights. We do need to make a decision regarding the proposal to leave it in the NDA, which I support. Okay, we can go ahead and do that without objection. Anybody objects to that? Councilmember Rice will have, okay, so do you want to go? Councilmember Rima first.
I just want to say, I look at this as a economic development driver in a local area, in a particular area. I look at it as the word placemaking was used. I think it would be a placemaking initiative. I look at it as a workforce development initiative. My concern today primarily is, once we start down the road, can we afford to actually support this initiative? And I want to just flag that what I heard was $750,000 a year, which is 2/3 of what we already spend on WorkSource Montgomery. So everyone should just be aware, that's what the proposal is now. maybe that's great. Maybe that's what we want to do. I'm just saying, this 40,000 leads to something bigger, and I would urge you to try to get that cost down. That's what it was my main point. Try to get that cost down. I think that leaving it in the NDA is terrific, and I support that. And it sounds like we have agreement to move forward.
Senator Glass?
Thank you. It's a very healthy conversation about $41,000 for a food hall. And real briefly, I think the points that have been raised are really important in terms of the need to do a landscape analysis whenever we want to take on new endeavors, because as has been stated, elements of this currently exist within government and supporting agencies and organizations. And so clearly, I think we all support this type of innovative community entrepreneurial project, but I don't want this food hall to cannibalize from other existing programs that might exist throughout the county, as my colleague, Councilmember Rice, alluded to before.
Councilmember Rice.
Just very quickly, this is not about the money. This is about involving current stakeholders in workforce development decisions that we make to make sure that we're all on the same page. That's all this is. $41,000, again, at the end of the day is not a big deal. But when you say this will be coupled with a paid year-long hospitality workforce development program for residents who are ready to begin the next chapter of their lives, that's what USG and Montgomery College do right now. And then when they say, hey, and we haven't been involved and engaged in this, that's the problem. It's not about the money. It's just about making sure we all have everybody on the same page. And as a person who's staked and has a responsibility with USG as Board of Advisors in terms of strategic plan when it comes to what it is that we're going to do with the future of all of the programs at USG. And for me to not have knowledge, and as to be education chair, and for Marriott, our leading employer in the county from a private sector who does this work, who partners with us to also not have awareness, and have Montgomery College, who deals in the education space in making sure that folks are educated with programs to follow into the hospitality space, to also not be aware, is the problem. It's not the money. That's the challenge.
Okay, so we do have a motion to keep it in the NDA. Is there any objection to keep it in the NDA as it was offered? And with that also, then we have a budget to adopt. So, yes.
Actually,
what else?
I'll follow after Mr. Friedson, but there is one housekeeping item that was discussed at the committee, and I got an email about budget amendments, but I'll address that. But I think Mr. Friedson's comment is slightly different.
Yeah, I just wanted to very, very briefly mention, and I talked to Gene about this, Nonprofit Village funding. We talked about this robustly in committee. I don't know that the staff packet fully reflected it, so I just wanted to make sure there was universal agreement. I want to make sure that it's reflected in the budget resolution, that there was $85,000, which was not the full request, but what was funded by the county executive for the ongoing base budget expenses, and there was $100,000 in addition to that as part of the expansion. Last year it was used, or this current year, FY19 was used for moving expenses. Moving forward, the proposal that's going to be used for ongoing operating expenses. Finance seems comfortable with that. The committee was comfortable with that as well. I just want to make sure that it wasn't the staff recommendation, but the county executive's recommendation that was approved 3-0 at committee, and I just want to make sure that that is reflected in the budget resolution when it's passed.
Okay, anything else, Mr.?
Thank you.
Sure. Just real quick, the executive recommended shifting $1,070,000 for the debt service. And during the Fed committee, we were told by OMB staff that was inaccurate now, that they only needed $928,000, so that $142,000 should stay in the incubator NDA. I think momentarily we just received budget amendments, but while we're here, staff is just going to recommend that we leave another $142,000 in the incubator NDA as was planned by the executive for the incubator study. So rather than having to take that item up separately at another time, we could just do that right now.
Okay, Council Vice President Katz.
Very quickly, Gene, does that debt service, is that counted in the number that I always talk about being the third largest part of the budget? Is this debt number included in that debt number? It is. Okay, thank you.
All right, so so can you rephrase your recommendation for us to consider?
Sure.
to move?
Staff recommends that the council approve a smaller shift to the debt service budget of 928,000, which would have 142,000 therefore remain in the incubator NDA. Alternatively, you could just say we're going to leave 142,000 in the incubator NDA.
Do I need to move that, or was that
Yes,
with the
that was
committee?
not
Okay,
part of the
so
committee
moved.
recommendation.
Moved and seconded, moved by Council Member Rice, seconded by Councilmember Friedson. Is there any objection to doing this? Nope. Okay, so we're good. And so with that, we would like to then now, show of hands, adopt the recommended NDA. Please raise your hand. That is unanimous. Wonderful. And now to item number 45, which will probably be a little bit involved too. Anyway.
You said earlier it'd be this afternoon. You didn't mean to be right, but it is this afternoon.
I know, and we have literally an hour because folks need to, there's the other bi-county meeting, et cetera, so let's try to work through this as quickly as possible. I will just say very briefly that the GO committee did have already conversations regarding the community engagement cluster. We, of course, needed to come back after Fed had met in order to take up the remainder of the different decisions. Ms. Price is here also to kind of walk us through what it is that we need to do. I will also point out that that there is a memo. It was an item that I believe we already adopted in our consent calendar, which was a recommendation to my colleagues in the Government Operations Fiscal Policy Committee had already taken this up to place $230,000 for 2 additional FTEs to the reconciliation list to expand the capacity of the regional services centers. I will just share very quickly to the rest of my colleagues that there have been so much conversation about the White Oak Science Gateway Plan and the need to have somebody that helps manage and helps carry out all of the work to further that particular plan. The Fed committee had taken up issues related to Whiteflint and the need for there to be a person that could kind of execute that kind of functions. Of course, in that particular item, that position would be funded by the taxing district. And so that kind of left the White Oak Science Gateway, Wheaton revitalization, possibly, with the Purple Line, maybe there might be Elk County redevelopment projects, et cetera. I kind of left that out there hanging. And so my recommendation was, as we're now strengthening the regional services centers, and already the regional services center directors are acting as liaison and troubleshooting and things like that, to create at least, to have at least 2 additional FTEs that would then be deployed according to the level of activity that might be occurring in a particular geographic area. So if, in the East County, we have all this activity going on, Jeru Bande is amazing, but he cannot clone himself and do everything. Perhaps he can use some assistance. Mr. Reimberto Rodriguez, Mr. Hartman, Ms. Montero, same thing. They do incredible work, but they do need to have some, additional assistance in that area. And so that's the spirit of that item that you will see on the reconciliation list. The idea is to begin to have a much more strategic way of providing that kind of support on a much more grassroots level that we have now. So I just wanted to flag that before we get into the rest of the decision points that we have to take up. Just wanted to flag that for my colleagues. Ms. Price.
Thank you. So the 2 items that you have before you remaining in the community engagement cluster's budget is to, 1, take action on the executive's proposal to create a regional business hub. The council has just approved the Fed committee's recommendation to reduce $200,000 from that transfer. So there is now $230,000 to fund the executive's recommendation, which does not leave enough funds for the 3 positions that had been sent over in that recommendation. So the council can either put the balance on the reconciliation list to fund the full $430,000, or the executive will have to craft a plan with the resources that are remaining.
Okay, and so again, I'll just flag that we already have those positions on the rec list that are to provide support for the regional services directors, as it relates to issues around redevelopment and revitalization, which would also have issues connected to businesses. So in essence, we already have something on the rec list that would also provide some support. I'm trying to just kind of wrap everything up in that way. It is not what has been proposed here specifically.
Previously in addition, but now it can plug the hole. Is that right?
Well, I think it comes very close, right? What's on the rec list, because we approved $230,000 for 2 additional FTEs. So even though it's not exactly, fits with the gap that has been identified in what we just did, but it does provide some additional support that can be deployed, deputized according to the need around the different regional services centers. Okay? So, well, it's almost exactly the same. That was kind of coincidental. All right, so any discussion? I'm not hearing any proposal to reinstate that additional money, but I'll open it up to discussion. Councilmember Albornoz saved the day without realizing it was being saved. Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you, Madam President. So this is what I was trying to say way too early in this conversation.
Been so patient.
Yeah, I was channeling my best Gilda Radner, never mind. So thank you very much. I just wanted to comment specifically on the 2 FTEs as proposed and just underscore a couple of things. To Mr. Fletcher's point, there is obviously an ongoing evaluation and analysis of how exactly the business hub will work in light of the Fed Committee's recommendations, but also even before the Fed Committee's recommendation, it sounded like there was still the development of how this was going to be part of a broader strategy. And I just felt that given those conversations were ongoing in the spirit of collaborating between the executive and council, that we hold off on the expenditures of those until we can follow up with a conversation regarding what that plan specifically would look like. And I also wanted to take the opportunity to put a plug in that, because I support the positions in general, and I think adding more support to the regional service centers is critically important, but that those positions have a preference for people that are bilingual, especially acknowledging that many of the small businesses that they would be tasked with supporting are often coming from our immigrant community. And so I wanted to move that we hold off on the expenditure of those 2 positions as recommended in the county executive's budget, notwithstanding the broader conversation of the $400,000, and that we wait until approval of those expenditures until we come back and hear more from the executive branch. And I do want to say, and you were alluding to this earlier, Mr. Fletcher, but there needs to be a comprehensive plan as soon as possible, because all of these conversations we're having regarding these specific and important elements, we need a plan and we need it soon. And I know you're feeling very anxious as we are. And I know that there's an effort right now and a listening tour to hear more from our business community. But it's something that we certainly look forward to seeing and collaborating with you on. But in light of the vacancy that's going to be happening within the Economic Development Corporation, this is the right time, and conversations we're having with WorkSource Montgomery, this is the right time for us to develop such a comprehensive plan. But I did want to move that we hold off on those 2 FTEs recommended by the executive branch until we hear back on more what the plan entails, and put a plug in for them being bilingual.
And I would just note the executive's plan actually had 3 FTEs, but to your point, that they would need to be held off on, and it would need to be bilingual. Mm-hmm. And I would just like to make sure that I'm understanding what's being recommended. The executive's proposal will not go forward with the $430,000, but they would have $230,000 to allocate towards FTEs. And if the GO Committee's recommendation to add 2 FTEs for the Regional Service Center is approved, then that would also help supplement the Regional Business Hub work as well.
Right, so how does that interact with your proposal?
I'm not sure. I think that acknowledging that the two positions that are on the reconciliation list could represent the two positions that we're talking about now.
No, because, wait,
You're talking about the existing.
So in total, the executive's recommendation put forward 3 new positions. GO's recommendation put forth 2 new positions. The GO committee's recommendation is now on the reconciliation list, so it's to be seen how that will shake out in the end. But as it stands, where resources are, there is not enough money to fund the 3 FTEs that the executive had recommended.
So there are enough, we have 229,583 remaining, which might then fund how
It
many?
could fund the 2 grade 23 positions. There's enough to cover that. It does not, as it stands now, provide enough funding for the grade 28 position.
Right.
I think that it would be helpful for us to receive a plan from the executive branch before any hiring is done, so that we could put that forward to receive that plan before the hiring and make that a condition in the resolution so that we know, we see ahead of time how this plan would actually move forward.
That's what I was going for.
Right, so we can move forward with the funding, but then but they are not to move forward until we receive the
Correct.
plan. Is that, okay, so that is the new, that is the modified, and so it's been moved by Councilmember Albornoz, and it's been seconded by Councilmember Joando. Okay, got it. All right, Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you for the motion, Councilmember Albornoz. The fact that you were a department director, to me, is important in this conversation about saying, we'd like to see a plan before we go adding staff here. I wanted to express that same sentiment, but I didn't necessarily have it refined to a motion, and I'm glad you did. Just to clarify, the executive proposed 5 staff.
No.
The executive proposed.
Originally.
No.
The executive proposed 3 new
3.
staff and transferring 2 existing staff, so it was a
And
total.
transferring, so there is 5 in the group, but 2 were transferred, I see. So those 2 remain transferred.
That's the next item on the list, but assuming yes.
So this motion to say we're not hiring more staff until we see a plan, we also have to recognize that they're transferring existing staff. Are we saying that they can't transfer?
Well, that's the next item for us
That's the
to.
Business Solutions Group? Okay, so that's different. All right, well, I concur. I think that we ought to get a very convincing presentation here. My perspective so far is that the regional center staff all do this business engagement work. It's just part of the job for everybody in the regional center offices. And that adding someone who says that they're going to do business engagement work might mean that people who are doing it as part of their job shift it to that new person and then they do something else. Or it could mean that we're doing a lot more business engagement. I don't know yet. I'd like to see how this is all going to fit together. But I think, we need to do a better job with the small business community, no question. This isn't the big economic development issue that we're talking about as far as our tax revenues declining and so on and so forth. But I think this would be helpful. But I'd like to see a real plan before we really get into it. Thanks.
So let me just note that the regional services centers do more than just obviously business development. I know when I was serving on the HHS committee, we would have all these conversations about all of those services that they are able to provide and could provide. This is how we, with the East County particularly, began to strengthen what they were doing. So you have health care being, services being provided from there. You have, of course, jobs, you have ESOL classes, you have so many different things. And so the only caveat I will put on all of this is that I don't want to get in the weeds also of telling the administration how to do their work, because I already know that the regional services centers don't have staff. They just don't. And so any capacity that we can give them to strengthen that, I assume that the directors are going to be very intimately involved in how they're going to deploy that. It's going to be a win for our communities, especially as we talk about lack of transportation, which has been discussed on this day so many times about an equity issue. This allows the people to live in those areas like the East County, like the Mid County, like the Up County, to access services from the Regional Services Center and be geographically accessible versus having to get in a bus to come all the way to Rockville. So I just want to present the macro picture here, that, yes, we're talking specifically about business development, but if they can stop doing business development and actually have somebody that can do business development, and they can turn to so many other issues that they have to address that are, particularly regarding particular geographic areas. Just want to keep the big picture also as we have these conversations. All right, Councilmember Rice.
Thank you very much, Madam President. And so I just want to be clear, because it was mentioned that this would be geographically dispersed, but on the reconciliation list, it actually has it identified as Mid-County and East County. And so would those people just solely be in Mid and East County, is just my first question in terms of understanding.
No, the geo positions?
Yeah, on our rec list, it says one for Mid-County, one for East County. That's what they put. And so that's why I was just trying to be sure.
If that is the
I
case, that
can
needs to be
update
amended,
that.
because my proposal was that we should add positions that then can be determined according to whatever activity, economic development activity or revitalization, et cetera, is going on. So maybe you have part-time at the East County, part-time in the Mid-County. Something's happening in the Up-County, then you can have the other position be deputized Up-County, and then Purple Line, then, that other. So the idea was not to make it prescriptive, but let it be driven by the need in the community.
Thank you very much, Madam
yeah.
President. That's exactly in line. That's what you described.
Yeah.
And so that's what but then it wasn't reflected on the reconciliation
All right,
list
we
that
need
way.
to
So just wanted to.
make sure that that is
Yep.
reflected.
Okay,
Thank
so
you
thank
so
you very
much.
much. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you. Thank you for this discussion that we've certainly taken quite a bit of time to hash out. I think the comment in the beginning about looking forward to a comprehensive, holistic economic development strategy. I think we all want that, and we're all looking forward to that and hopeful that with you coming in this new role and really overseeing this, along with some of your colleagues on the second floor, can explain to us how that is going to work. And I think to the point of the council president about the way that these new positions, either on the rec list or the one position that's being moved or added, however we want to frame it, I agree. I'm hopeful that the regional services center directors who actually know this work have been doing this work, probably too much, frankly, of this work, really know where to deploy these resources. I think one of the challenges that I have had throughout this process is not understanding who these people are reporting to. And I think that's been part of our challenge with the entire way that a lot of these proposals have been presented. Understanding, are they reporting to Judy Stevenson, who has been in this role and has her hub? Are they reporting to the regional services directors? Are they reporting to you? Are they reporting to Ms. Benjamin? Are they reporting to somebody else within the executive branch who is overseeing this? I don't think there's a lot of clarity that has been shared with us. I don't think that that's your fault, Mr. Fletcher. I think that that's a reflection of the fact that a lot of this has not been fully fleshed out in the comprehensive and holistic way that you mentioned earlier. I think we all share a goal. I think Mr. Albornoz's proposal to come up with the specific plan of how this is going to work and come back to us is a sound one and a good one. And I think Mr. Reamer's right. It reflects his background as a director of really understanding the process and knowing how it works. I don't think anybody wants to dictate how jobs are done, but we want to know what the job is, who the jobs report to, and how we can hold accountable the individuals who are entrusted with the work of the community, the work of the people, and the expenditures that we're making with the public taxpayer dollars that our residents are entrusting in us. And so I appreciate this conversation. I think it reflects all of our shared goals. I know that you have and that we have to make sure that we do have that comprehensive, holistic economic development strategy, and that we can move forward with one direction, with one voice, with one effort to ensure that we are providing the type of emphasis on growing our economy in the way that all of us would want and the way that I think we need in order to keep up with the growing demands that the public expects of us.
Thank you. I do want to also point out, Councilmember Rice, that for some reason, this is the latest reconciliation list. The previous one did not have that specific, so yeah, it was weird because I was like, wait, that's not what but for some reason the latest one did, and so we'll make sure to edit that.
The packet says that.
Well,
I'll make
yeah,
sure
we'll-
that it's
We'll edit
updated.
it, because again, I have the one that we've been working on, and it didn't specify it. Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much, Madam President. As we've done these four businesses, in fact, Craig and I were there at the Up County Regional Service Center just yesterday for Business Connects, and they really are the natural hub for businesses, especially small businesses. Mr. Fletcher was there as well as many other people, and it really, when we've started doing these four business listening tours, we are using the regional service centers because that is a place where everybody knows, and it's in someone's neighborhood, and they understand that if they have a concern, that's where they should go. So this is just another example of how we should be building on that. And many times, especially in government, we try to make things, we don't try to, we end up making things more confusing than it needs to be. If we could keep the regional service centers being the hub, whether it be for business or for any other type of thing, it is very, very helpful to us. I can tell you already from the four business centers, from the four business listening tours that we've had good attendance. We've had good outcomes. We've had people that are very, very interested in trying to help us get to a better business climate, and we need to start doing them right in the regional service centers.
Okay, so I do know that we do have a motion and a second, and I think we need clarification on, is that just for the 229,583? Or do
That's
we?
correct. And also requiring that, as a condition of granting the funds, that the executive branch provide a plan before any positions are hired.
Right, and then we also need
Can I
the
just-
shift.
I think you need to either appropriate the funds or not. I mean, they can't come back and then you have to approve it.
Right, I
As
think
long
the
as you're not
motion
doing
is,
that, if you're
I think the
just
motion is
getting
for
a
us to
report.
approve, I think the motion is for us to approve the funds, but ask them to come to us with a plan before they start the hiring process.
Yeah, but it's not going to require council approval of the plan. They can send you a plan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just so that we know.
All right, I just want to clarify that it's not
Right. That
you're not
before they
doing it
do
as a
the
condition of
Of spending the money,
of
I
the
don't think we
spending
can
the
do
money.
that, right?
Right.
Right,
That's what I'm
yeah.
trying to say, right.
We still would be asking them to submit something before they move forward.
So that we understand
That's fine,
what's
yeah.
up.
Okay.
Now, my question was, though, that's just the 229,583, although we do have the issue of the transfer, right? Still pending?
That item was taken up previously, so.
So we're done with that one? The one
We're-
to take action on the executive's proposal to shift 356,741 and 2 FTEs from the Small Business Solutions Group?
Oh, I apologize. That is a
That's
separate issue. We
Okay.
have not done that one yet.
So I think the question was, is this particular, motion, would that also apply to that other item? Does the council want to have also an understanding of the plan before?
I don't know that it's necessary to tie the two together. If we are going to approve the $230,000 for the business solutions for the regional business hub, it's still fine for us to transfer the business solutions group over to the regional services centers because their
We
responsibility.
already know what they do.
Yes, we already
Okay.
know what they do.
I'm
Their
just checking with the
responsibilities
body
won't change.
because, all right, very cool. Okay, that answers your question. All right, so all those in favor of Councilmember Albernaz's proposal, seconded by Councilmember Joando, please raise your hand. All right, that's unanimous. So we're just asking the police bring us a plan before you move forward with the hiring. All right, so, and then do we have to now vote on the 2 FTEs for the Small Business Solutions Group that will be shifted?
Yes.
Okay, so now that's before us. That's a committee recommendation, right? Is it?
The committee,
No.
we didn't formally.
Right. Okay, is there a motion?
I move, so move.
Moved by Councilmember Katz, seconded by Councilmember Rice. Councilmember Reamer.
Thank you, Council President Navarro. I just wanted to say this group was created as a result of legislation that I co-authored with Councilmember Berliner. And we indeed envisioned it as sort of constituent services for businesses, that there are businesses that have challenges navigating processes, and they need someone to call. And so I think it might very well make sense to be in the community engagement cluster. I have no particular objection to that. And we'll look forward to, I do think it will be helpful when you are working on the plan about the regional center business engagement to factor in this business solutions group and tell us how these things fit together. So my initial reaction to this was, why wouldn't you add the resources at the business solution group? But if you want to do it a different way, I'll look forward to hearing from you about that. But in any event, this seems fine to transfer that work there, but it will need to harmonize with the regional center-based strategy.
Councilmember Joanda.
Just quickly, lest you leave with no hope, Mr. Fletcher, I think this is a great move. I think when a lot of us, when we were aspiring to the office, said, look, regional centers need more support. The small business navigator, God bless her heart, Mr. Stevenson, needs more support. And I think the concepts are related, and we need to get the services to the people. So I commend the executive on that concept. We just, as you've heard again, we just want to work closely with you and hear about the plan. But I think that the concept of bringing them together, in my view, is a good thing, and I'm glad you're moving in that direction.
Great. So I think with that, then we can vote on this particular item. Actually, is there any objection to adopting this particular item? I don't see any objection. And so with that, I guess that we can take up the totality of the budget, right? Do I need a motion for that? No, because we already have it. No. Right, so I may need a motion to adopt the, Councilmember Katz, seconded by Councilmember Joanda. All those in favor, raise your hand. And that is unanimous. Thank you so much. I'm sure we'll figure all this out together. Thank you to the regional services directors, the ones that are here and some that left. Let's go do this. Hopefully we'll be done with all of this in May. Thank you. And we're adjourned.